Dr. Adrian Voss stood at the center of Harbor Ridge Military Medical Center's trauma bay, clipboard in one hand, contempt in the other, and he laughed. Not a small laugh. A full, carrying, deliberate laugh that bounced off the fluorescent-lit walls and landed on every nurse, resident, and orderly within earshot. "She can barely handle a scalpel," he said, loud enough that Lena Whitmore heard it from 12 feet away. Loud enough that the charge nurse flinched. Loud enough that 3 first-year residents suddenly found something fascinating to study on their tablets. Lena didn't move, didn't blink, just kept her hand steady on the supply cart and let the words hit her like weather. Uncomfortable, temporary, survivable. She had survived worse, far worse. Things that would have broken every person in that room, including the man doing the laughing. She knew that. She was the only one who did. If this story already has you gripped, stay with me until the very end. Like this video, leave a comment with the city you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning had started the way mornings at Harbor Ridge always started, with the smell of industrial cleaner failing to cover the underlying scent of something antiseptic and slightly desperate, with the overhead lights that hummed half a note too high, and with the particular brand of controlled chaos that passed for routine in a Level 1 trauma center, serving both the civilian population of Clearwater Bay and the military installation 12 miles up the coast. Lena had been at the hospital for 3 years. 3 years of 7-to-7 shifts, of stocking supply carts and starting IVs and talking patients through the particular terror of not knowing what was happening to their own bodies. She was good at her job. She was in the quiet, unspectacular way of competence that nobody notices until it disappears, essential. The night nurses trusted her handoffs. The patients remembered her name. The attending physicians who actually bothered to pay attention knew that when Lena Whitmore was assigned to a trauma bay, the bay ran cleaner, quieter, and faster than when she wasn't. Dr. Adrian Voss was not one of those physicians. He had arrived at Harbor Ridge 14 months ago, transferred from a large private hospital in Seattle with a CV that he referenced in conversation more often than most people referenced current events. He was 43, broad-shouldered, possessed of the kind of jawline that photographed well for department newsletters, and completely, catastrophically certain that he was the smartest person in any room he entered. He'd restructured the ER intake process 3 times in his first year, each restructuring making the workflow marginally more efficient for physicians and measurably worse for nursing staff, and each time he'd framed it as progress. He called nurses by their first names in a specific way, a fractional pause before the name, a slight emphasis, that communicated without ever saying it outright that the first name was a ceiling. The incident that morning had been, on its surface, minor. A second-year resident named Marcus Webb had fumbled a central line placement on a 60-year-old male with septic shock. Lena had been in the room. She'd seen the angle was wrong before the needle broke skin, had started to say something, and then Voss had walked in, taken in the scene, and made his assessment in under 4 seconds. "Whitmore, step back. Webb, restart. And someone tell me why we have a floor nurse in a critical procedure bay." "She was assisting," Webb said, and his voice had the careful tone of someone choosing words in a minefield. "With what? Moral support?" Voss had taken the tray from Lena's hands, not roughly, but not gently either. The kind of casual dispossession that didn't require force because it didn't expect resistance. "She can barely handle a scalpel. Get her back to vitals." He said it without looking at her, which was somehow worse. Lena had stepped back. She'd picked up her supply cart. She'd left the bay. In the hallway, a first-year named Priya had been waiting with a patient chart, and she'd seen Lena's face and said, very quietly, "He does that to everyone." "I know," Lena said. "You okay?" "I'm fine." She wasn't fine exactly, but she was something she'd been for a long time, which was functional. She pushed the cart to the next bay and got back to work. The rest of the morning moved the way hospital mornings do, in a rhythm that feels either too fast or too slow, depending on which end of a crisis you're standing on. By noon, the ER had processed a cardiac event, a compound fracture from a construction site accident, 2 overdoses, and a 12-year-old with a broken collarbone who cried quietly and steadily the entire time, and whom Lena sat with for 20 minutes after the attending had moved on, just talking, just being present, because that was something the attending didn't have and Lena did. The cafeteria was crowded at 12:30. Lena took her tray to the corner table near the window that looked out onto the hospital's side garden, a patch of grass and 2 concrete benches that nobody actually used, and ate her lunch alone. She did this most days. It wasn't antisocial exactly. It was more that she'd learned a long time ago that silence was not the same thing as emptiness. She could fill it with things that didn't require an audience. Her phone had 2 messages, one from her landlord about the parking situation, one from a number she didn't recognize, which she opened and then set face down on the table without responding. She was most of the way through her sandwich when she became aware that someone was standing across the table. She looked up. It was Donna Marsh, one of the charge nurses, a woman in her 50s with 28 years at Harbor Ridge, and the particular authority that comes from outlasting every administrative restructuring, every new director, every wave of fresh graduates who thought they'd revolutionize something. Mind if I sit? Go ahead. Donna sat and opened her own lunch. They ate in silence for a moment. This was one of the things Lena liked about Donna. She didn't require conversation as a proof of comfort. Voss is pushing to restructure the trauma nursing assignments again, Donna said finally. Lena kept eating. What kind of restructure? The kind where experienced nurses get moved to overflow and new grads get trauma bay exposure because it builds resilience. She put air quotes around the last 2 words with her fork, which really means the kind where the numbers look good on paper and the floor runs on adrenaline instead of competence. Has he submitted it formally? Not yet, but he's talked to 3 board members in the last week. Donna looked at her. Your name came up. Lena set her sandwich down. He described you as misallocated, said Harbor Ridge needed to be right-sizing its talent distribution. Another fork, which translated means he wants you moved to General Med-Surg. Med-Surg, Lena said it flatly. 3rd floor, long-term recovery. Nothing acute. Donna's voice was even, but her eyes weren't. I've put in a counter-argument with the nursing director, but Voss has been politicking this for weeks, and the board likes his metrics. Lena was quiet for a moment. The garden outside was empty. 2 pigeons were doing something complicated near the bench. What do you need from me? She asked. I need you to not do anything dramatic. When have I ever done anything dramatic? Donna almost smiled. That's what concerns me. You've been so calm about all of this for so long that I genuinely can't tell if you're okay or if you're about to quietly detonate. Lena picked her sandwich back up. I'm okay. You sure? I'm sure. She wasn't sure, but she was something, and that something had kept her going for longer than she could easily explain, and it would keep her going today. The call came at 4:47 in the afternoon. Lena was in the supply room doing inventory, a task that had somehow fallen entirely to her over the past 6 months, despite not being in her job description, and which she did anyway because someone had to and because she had a system that worked. When the overhead intercom crackled and the words came through that changed the shape of the day. Trauma alert. Multiple incoming. ETA 9 minutes. 3 casualties. Military. Critical. She was already moving before the second sentence finished. The trauma bay was activated fast. Voss arrived 2 minutes in, tie loosened, tablet in hand, the particular sharp energy he carried when there was something worth performing competence at. He started issuing assignments in rapid sequence. Bay assignments, blood products, surgical alerts. And he was not wrong about most of it, which was the complicated thing about Voss. He was good in a crisis. He was also a particular kind of person who used crises as social currency, which meant he was always performing at the same time as he was functioning, and sometimes those 2 things got in each other's way. Lena positioned herself at Bay 2. Voss glanced at her. Whitmore, I need you on logistics, supply coordination, blood product tracking. She looked at him steadily. You're going to need all 3 bays staffed. I have staff. Webb is your most experienced resident and he's in Bay 1. Priya has done 3 traumas. You've got 2 new grads on today. She didn't say it with heat, just said it. You need Bay 2 covered by someone who can run it. Something moved across Voss's face, a calculation. She watched him run the math of his staffing situation against his certainty that she was wrong to be here, and she watched the math win, barely. Fine, Bay 2. He pointed. You're assisting. You don't make calls. You support whoever I assign as primary. Understood. The ambulances arrived at 4:56 am. The first Marine came in on a gurney that was already low on blood. His name, from the field report transmitted ahead of arrival, was Staff Sergeant Dominic Farrell, 29 years old, Special Operations, shrapnel trauma to the chest and left shoulder from an explosion at a training exercise that had gone badly wrong somewhere on the base 12 miles up the coast. His pressure was tanking. His breathing was labored and irregular in the particular way that meant one thing to most of the room and one very specific thing to Lena. The second Marine was conscious, which was alarming in its own way. He was in so much pain that consciousness seemed like an aggressive act. Corporal James Tate, blast injury to both legs, significant blood loss, beginning to show the early signs of shock that, if not intercepted precisely, would slide him into irreversible territory within the next 20 minutes. The third Marine arrived last and quietest, Sergeant First Class Ray Okafor, who looked deceptively stable until you read his vitals and understood that what looked like composure was actually the stillness of a body that had run out of energy to fight. Internal bleeding, suspected, the kind that didn't announce itself. Voss took the first Marine, Webb took the third. Lena got Corporal Tate, and she moved without pause, without drama, her hands finding the rhythm of the work before her mind had consciously cataloged the problem. She got a line in. 2 lines, actually. Large-bore IVs, both antecubital, within 90 seconds. She called for blood products. She read his vitals in the real-time, layered way. Not just the numbers, but the pattern behind the numbers, the story. The numbers were trying to tell about what was happening inside a body that was doing its best to compensate for catastrophic blood loss. Push the fluids, she told the nurse assisting her, a young woman named Carla, whose hands were shaking slightly. How fast? Wide open, then reassess in 2 minutes. Lena was simultaneously applying pressure to the leg wound, which was messy and significant and required both hands in a specific angle. Keep an eye on his pressure. If it drops below 70 systolic, you tell me immediately. Okay. Carla steadied. She had good instincts, just needed the direction. Lena worked. She was aware, at the edges of her attention, that the room was noisy. The particular productive noise of a trauma bay in full operation, voices layering over each other, monitors alarming and being silenced and alarming again. She filtered it, kept her focus on Tate. He was looking at her. People in that much pain usually looked inward, at some private landscape of agony that had nothing to do with the room around them. Tate was looking at her. His eyes were dark, glassy with pain and blood loss and something else. Something that she recognized only because she'd seen it once before, a long time ago, on different faces in a very different kind of room. Recognition. Hey, she said, low, just for him. I've got you. You're going to be okay. His lips moved. She leaned slightly closer. Raven, he said. Her hands didn't stop moving. Her face didn't change. But something tightened behind her sternum, a deep internal seizing, like a door she'd kept closed for 3 years rattling suddenly in its frame. She didn't answer him. She kept working. Across the bay, things were going wrong with Farrell. She registered it without looking up. The change in vocal pitch from Voss's direction, the particular sequence of barked orders that indicated a response wasn't matching expectation. She caught fragments. Tension pneumothorax suspected, needle decompression, pressure not recovering the way it should. She registered it, kept her hands on Tate, made herself stay. But then she heard something that she shouldn't have heard, which was a silence. A specific 2-second silence from Voss that indicated a man reconsidering a choice he'd already made, and in trauma medicine, a 2-second silence was a long time. She glanced up. Voss was at Farrell's bay. He had the needle in his hand. His positioning was, she clocked it in a fraction of a second, wrong. Not catastrophically, not yet, but the angle was going to give him a glancing decompression at best and a pneumothorax exacerbation at worst, and Farrell was already crashing. Carla, she said, take pressure here, both hands, don't let up. Okay. Lena was already moving. Dr. Voss? She said it calmly, at a volume that cut through the bay noise without being loud. He looked up, and the expression on his face was the full complex mixture of relief and fury that happened when someone who needed help was forced to acknowledge they needed it. The angle, Rotate 2 degrees anterior. A beat. 1 beat. Then he adjusted. The needle went in. The sound of released air pressure was audible even over the monitor noise. Farrell's oxygen saturation, which had been plummeting, stabilized. Not perfect, not immediately, but enough. Enough to buy time. Voss didn't say anything to her. She went back to Tate. Around the trauma bay, nobody said anything either. But she felt the quality of attention in the room shift. The subtle, full-body reorientation of a group of people who had just watched something happen that didn't fit their existing understanding of the situation. Tate was still looking at her. "You didn't have to tell him that," Tate said. His voice was rough, barely there. "He was going to get there," she said. "I just got him there faster." "Sure." His eyes were heavy. "Raven." This time she looked at him directly. Let a moment pass. "You need to rest," she said. "I know you," he said. "Coast Province, 2019. You had a different name then." His breathing was slow, labored. "You carried Martinez out. Whole sector was compromised. You said—" He stopped, coughed, winced hard. "You said you'd be back for the rest of us." Her hands were still working, checking the IV lines, monitoring his pressure, doing everything that needed doing. "You need to rest," she said again. But her jaw was tight, and her eyes, for just a moment, were somewhere very far from Clearwater Bay. By 6 p.m., all 3 Marines were alive. Farrell was in surgery. Tate was stabilized and being moved to the ICU. Okafor, whose internal bleeding had been less extensive than feared, was sedated and monitored in critical care. The trauma bay was being cleaned. The particular efficient misery of post-trauma cleanup, biohazard bags, equipment reset, surfaces wiped, had a way of making the intensity of the preceding hours seem both very recent and very distant. Lena was writing her documentation notes at the nursing station when Voss appeared. She finished the sentence she was writing before she looked up. "That was good work," he said. The words landed awkwardly, like he'd rehearsed them in a language he didn't speak fluently. "Thank you." "The decompression thing." He didn't finish the sentence. "You would have gotten there." "I know." He said it quickly. Then, "Regardless, good call." He turned to leave. "Dr. Voss?" She said it without particular inflection. He stopped. "The reassignment to Med-Surg, are you moving forward with it?" His back was to her. She saw the slight tension in his shoulders. "That's still under administrative review," he said. "I see." He walked away. She went back to her documentation. Donna Marsh appeared at her elbow approximately 45 seconds later with the reliability of someone who'd been watching from the moment things started happening. "He told you about the reassignment?" Donna kept her voice below the background noise. "He didn't confirm or deny it." "Which means he's still moving forward." Donna leaned against the counter. "The board meeting is Thursday. He's presenting the restructure then." Lena kept writing. "Lena." "I heard you." "What are you going to do?" She finished her sentence, set down her pen, looked at Donna with the particular directness that people who'd known her longest had learned to interpret as something between composure and warning. "I'm going to finish my shift," she said, "and then I'm going to figure out what comes next." What came next happened faster than she expected. She was in the locker room at 7:15, changing out of scrubs, when her phone rang. Unknown number again, different from the one this morning. She stared at it for 3 rings. Answered. Whitmore. A man's voice, military cadence, familiar in a way that made her close her eyes briefly. "Yes." "This is Commander Ellis Reed, Naval Special Operations Medical Command. We've been aware of the incident at Harbor Ridge today." She leaned against the locker. "Okay." "Staff Sergeant Farrell, Corporal Tate, and Sergeant Okafor are assigned to Unit 7. You may know of them." "I treated 2 of them today. That's the extent of my involvement." Corporal Tate gave a statement to the base medical liaison an hour ago. A pause. "He identified you by a call sign. He also provided a summary of his assessment of your technique during his treatment." Lena was very still. "I don't go by that call sign anymore," she said. "I understand." Reed's voice was careful. Not cold, careful. "I'm calling to inform you that due to the nature of Tate's statement, a formal review of events surrounding the Coast Province incident from 2019 has been reopened. This is not a punitive action. This is an evidentiary review. The locker room was empty. The fluorescent light buzzed the same half-note too high buzz as every other light in this building. I was discharged, she said, honorably. The investigation concluded. The investigation concluded with information that we now have reason to believe was incomplete. He paused again. Dr. Whitmore, I want to be clear. This review is in your interest. We have new evidence. The use of her full title, Doctor, landed somewhere in the center of her chest like a key in a lock she'd forgotten she had. She hadn't been called that in 3 years. I'll need to consult with someone before agreeing to anything formally, she said. Of course, we're not moving fast on this, but I wanted you to have the information. Thank you, Commander. She hung up, stood in the empty locker room for a long moment. Then she sat down on the bench, put her elbows on her knees, and stared at the floor with the expression of someone watching 3 years of careful, controlled silence begin to crack down the middle. She'd built this life very deliberately. The name Lena Whitmore instead of the name she'd had before. The nurse's badge instead of the rank insignia she'd worn for 11 years. The supply cart instead of the trauma kit. The quiet instead of everything that had preceded it. She'd built it brick by brick, working around the wreckage of what she'd left behind, and she'd gotten good at it. She'd gotten good at being invisible in all the specific ways that kept her safe. And then today it happened. Farrell's chest, Tate's recognition, the angle of a needle. A call sign spoken out loud for the first time in 3 years by a man who'd bled on her hands and looked at her like she was something he thought he'd imagined. She pressed her palms flat against her knees, breathed. She'd thought she'd buried Raven deeply enough. She'd thought a new city, a new name, a new job description would be distance enough from the person she'd been and the things that had happened and the choice she'd made that had ended everything. She'd thought wrong, apparently. The question now was what she was going to do about Thursday's board meeting, Commander Ellis Reed's phone call, Corporal Tate's statement, and the 3 men in the ICU who'd complicated everything simply by surviving. She sat with the question for another 2 minutes. Then she stood up, picked up her bag, and walked out of the locker room. She had always been better at moving than at standing still, even when she didn't know exactly where she was going. The night was cool off the bay. Clearwater Bay in October had a particular kind of darkness, the marina lights reflecting off the water, the smell of salt and diesel, and something vaguely like winter coming. She walked to her car and sat in it without starting the engine. Her hands were on the steering wheel. Her eyes were on the windshield, which showed her nothing except the parking garage's concrete wall and her own faint reflection in the glass. She thought about 2019, about Coast Province and a night she'd relived, on average, every third dream for the following 3 years. About a decision she'd made in approximately 8 seconds that had saved 4 lives and ended her career, and about the official record that said she'd made an error in judgment, and about the way the official record had been so clean and so complete that she'd almost believed it herself. In the first few months, when belief would have been easier than the alternative. She thought about what Reed had said. New evidence, incomplete information, the specific, careful language of someone who knew more than they were saying on a first phone call. She thought about Tate's face, his recognition, his certainty, the way he'd set her call sign like it was a fact he'd been carrying for 7 years and was only now getting to put down. She thought about Voss, about Thursday, about Donna's face when she said your name came up. There was a version of this story where she stayed quiet, where she let the board do what it was going to do, accepted the med-surg reassignment, and let the review proceed without her active involvement. That version was predictable. She was good at predictable. She'd been living predictably for 3 years, but Corporal Tate had said Raven, out loud, in a trauma bay, with witnesses. And Commander Ellis Reed had called her Dr. Whitmore. And in the morning, she was going to have to go back into that building and be Lena Whitmore, the floor nurse. And she was going to have to do it while knowing that something was moving behind the walls of the life she'd constructed, something that had been still for a very long time and was no longer still. She started the engine. She drove home. She did not sleep particularly well, but she'd learned to work with that too. The body could do what it needed to do on less sleep than people thought, when necessity required it, and she had a feeling that the days ahead were going to require quite a bit. In the ICU on the 4th floor of Harbor Ridge, Corporal James Tate, lay in a bed with two IV lines running and a monitor tracing his vitals in steady green peaks. He was not asleep. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, working through something. He'd been working through it for several hours. The logistics of what he knew and what it meant and who he needed to tell and how fast things were going to move once he made the next call. He'd already made one call. Reed knew. That meant certain machinery was already in motion. But there was another call he needed to make. One that was older than Reed, older than the review, older than everything that had happened today. A call to the man who'd been trying to find the name behind the call sign for 7 years and had always come up just short. Tate reached for his phone. His arm ached. His legs ached. Everything ached with the specific full-body exhaustion of a body that had been through something catastrophic and survived it. He found the number, pressed call. It picked up on the second ring. "It's Tate," he said. "I found her." The man on the other end of the line didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "Where?" "Clearwater Bay, Harbor Ridge Military Medical Center." Tate shifted against the pillow, wincing at the pull in his legs. "She's going by Lena Whitmore, working as a floor nurse." Another silence. Tate had known Major Garrett Solis for 11 years, long enough to read the quality of his silences. This one was the kind that meant he was already moving. "Is she okay?" Solis asked. "She saved my life today. Farrell's too, probably." Tate paused. "She didn't want to be recognized. I could see it." "But you told Reed." "Reed needed to know. The review—" "I know about the review." Solis's voice was flat in the way it got when he was managing something that mattered more than he wanted to let on. "Tate, does she know you called me?" "No." A breath on the line. "Get some sleep. You did the right thing." The call ended. Tate set the phone on the bedside table, stared at the ceiling again. The monitor traced its green peaks steadily, indifferent to everything. He hoped he'd done the right thing. He wasn't entirely sure. Lena was at Harbor Ridge by 6:40 the next morning. She had a system for early mornings. Arrived before the shift change, before the overnight staff started their end-of-shift documentation, before the day carried whatever it was going to carry. The 20 minutes of near quiet before the building fully woke up were hers. She used them to check on patients from the previous day, to review overnight notes, to orient herself to the current state of things. Before the current state of things started moving faster than she could track. She checked on Tate first. He was awake. He was always going to be awake. She'd understood that from his face the night before. From the way he'd watched her with the particular alert stillness of someone whose nervous system had been trained to treat sleep as a tactical liability. He looked up when she came in, and the expression that crossed his face was complicated. "Morning," she said. She checked his IV sites. Both clean, good insertion points. She'd done those herself. "You came early," he said. "I come early most days." "Were you checking on me specifically or doing rounds?" She looked at him. "Both." He seemed to accept that. She moved around to check his wound dressings. The leg injuries were significant but cleanly treated, and the overnight notes showed stable vitals, which was better than she'd let herself hope at 4:56 yesterday afternoon. "I need to tell you something," he said. "You don't have to. I called someone last night, after I called Reed." His jaw was tight. "Someone who's been looking for you, for a while." She stopped moving. "His name is Garrett Solis. I know who Garrett Solis is." She said it quietly, and the quietness of it was the kind that had mass. She turned to face him. "How long have you been in contact with him?" "We've stayed close. Most of the unit has." Tate held her gaze. He had the look of a man who'd decided to take an incoming shot rather than dodge it. After everything that happened to you, he never believed the official version. None of us did." She was still. Her hands were at her sides. "What exactly did you tell him?" "Your location, your cover name, that you were okay." He paused. "That you saved my life." She exhaled slowly through her nose, the kind of exhale that was doing a lot of internal work. "Corporal Tate," she said, and she used his rank deliberately, a small recalibration. "I built something here, a quiet life, a functional—" "I know, I'm sorry." He meant it. She could see that he meant it, which made it harder, not easier. "But the review is already moving. Reed is already involved. The quiet life, I don't think it was going to stay quiet much longer, regardless. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the room's narrow window, Clearwater Bay was beginning to show the gray pink of early morning, the water flat and still and unreadable. Get some rest, she said finally. Your pressure is good. We'll reassess the dressings this afternoon. She walked out before he could say anything else. The day began officially at 7 a.m. with the shift change briefing, and it carried the particular weight of a day after a significant event, the kind of institutional hangover that follows a major trauma response, when everyone is technically recovered but nobody has fully processed. There was more coffee than usual. There were more pauses in conversation. The 3 Marines in the ICU were the unspoken presence in every hallway. Voss ran the briefing. He was crisper than usual, more focused, the way he sometimes got when he was managing something that had surprised him. He covered the overnight stats, the current census, the surgical schedule. When he got to the ICU update on the 3 military casualties, he read the status in clinical shorthand: stable, monitoring, surgical follow-up for Farrell, without looking up from his tablet. He didn't mention Lena. She sat in the 3rd row and took notes on the things that needed noting and let the rest go past. She'd done this long enough to know which parts of these briefings were information and which parts were performance. After the briefing, Donna appeared at her elbow with coffee and the expression of someone who'd been waiting. How are you? Fine. You've been saying that a lot lately. Because it keeps being true. Donna handed her the coffee. The board meeting is still Thursday. Voss's restructuring proposal is on the agenda, and apparently someone from Naval Special Operations Medical Command called the hospital administrator this morning. Lena's hand tightened fractionally on the coffee cup. When did you hear that? About 20 minutes ago. Administrator's assistant talks to the charge desk. Donna kept her voice low and even. I don't know what the call was about, but the administrator had it flagged as priority, and then Voss got pulled into a closed-door meeting at 7:15. Lena looked at her. Is he still in there? Was when I came to find you. She thought about Commander Reed, about the review moving faster than expected, about Tate's voice saying I called someone last night. Okay, she said. Lena, what's happening? And don't say fine. I'm not sure yet. She took a sip of the coffee. It was too hot, but she drank it anyway. I need to get through today. Can you cover me if Voss asks where I am between 9 and 10? Donna studied her. Where are you going to be? ICU, checking on patients. That's a normal thing you're allowed to do. I know. I just might be there a little longer than the chart requires. Donna's eyes narrowed slightly. Then she nodded, the deliberate nod of someone extending trust based on something older than evidence. Go. She got to Farrell's room first. He was post-surgical, still sedated, his chest moving with the aided rhythm of a ventilator that was doing the work his damaged lung wasn't yet ready to do alone. She read his chart. The surgery had gone well, better than the initial trauma scenario had suggested it might. His surgeon, Dr. Keiko Watanabe, had been thorough and had noted in her post-op assessment something that most surgeons didn't bother to record, that the pre-surgical stabilization of the patient had been exceptional, and that the management of the tension pneumothorax before arrival in the OR had likely been the deciding factor in the surgery's success. Lena read that sentence twice. Then she moved on. Okafor was awake, barely, with the slow, heavily medicated quality of someone operating at about 30% of their usual processing speed. But his eyes tracked when she came in, and he managed something approximating a coherent expression. Nurse, he said. His voice was rough. How's the pain? Manageable. A pause. Which is different from absent. That's honest. Good. She checked his IV, his monitor, the notes from overnight. The internal bleeding is controlled. You're going to need to stay quiet for at least a week. Actual quiet, not military definition quiet. Something that might have been amusement moved across his face. Is there a difference? Significant difference. Military quiet means you're running at 60% instead of 100. Hospital quiet means you're watching television and letting other people bring you food. That sounds terrible. It's temporary. He watched her as she worked. Then, you're good at this. It's my job. I've had a lot of nurses over the years. His speech was slow, careful, each word placed deliberately through the medication haze. You're different. She didn't answer that. She finished her chart notes and straightened. "Rest," she said. "I'll check back this afternoon." She was almost to the door when he said quietly, "Raven." She stopped, didn't turn. "Tate talks in his sleep," Okafor said. "We've been bunked near each other for 4 years. I know some things." A pause. "Whatever you're running from in this place, you don't have to. Not from us." She held herself very still for a moment, then she walked out. She found Tate's room again at 9:20 and almost walked past it because there was a man in the doorway she hadn't expected. He was tall, 2 inches over 6 feet, the kind of build that came from a decade of operational conditioning rather than a gym, wearing civilian clothes that fit the way clothes fit, when you'd recently had reason to dress like you weren't military. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, a jaw that needed a shave, and eyes that were the particular kind of focus that happened when someone was doing 3 things simultaneously and making it look like one. He was talking to Tate. He hadn't seen her yet. She recognized him in the same moment she recognized that she'd known, somewhere underneath everything, that this was coming. Major Garrett Solis. Except the rank was probably different now. It had been 3 years, and men like Solis didn't stay still. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and there was a fraction of a second, less than that really, a sliver of time too small to measure, where his expression did something unguarded. Then it was controlled again. But she'd seen it. "Dr. Whitmore," he said. "It's Nurse Whitmore here," she said. "Lena." She kept her voice level. "When did you arrive?" "This morning." He moved out of the doorway, giving her room. The courtesy of it was instinctive, not performative. "I drove through the night." "You drove from where?" "Fort Belmont, about 4 hours." He said it simply, like 4 hours through the night was a reasonable response to a phone call. She looked at Tate, who had the expression of a man who'd known he was starting something and was now experiencing the reality of having started it. "Can we talk?" Solis said. "Not here." "Somewhere? Is there somewhere?" "My break is at 10:30, she said. "There's a garden on the south side, usually empty." "I'll be there." She went to check Tate's vitals. Her hands were steady. Her chest was doing something complicated that she was not going to examine until she was alone. "I'm sorry," Tate said again, quietly. "Stop apologizing," she said. "Just get better." The garden was empty at 10:32, as expected. 2 concrete benches, a patch of grass that needed cutting, the sound of the bay traffic somewhere beyond the hospital's east wall. Lena sat on the bench that faced the building so she could see both exits. Old habit. Solis arrived at 10:34. He sat on the other bench, elbows on his knees, and didn't make her wait. "The review," he said. "Reed called me last night after Tate called him. They're reopening the Coast Province investigation formally. I've been pushing for this for 2 years. There was never enough to force it open until now." "What changed?" "Martinez." He said the name and watched her face. "He gave a full statement 6 months ago, voluntarily. He went to the Inspector General's office." She was quiet. Danny Martinez, the Marine she'd carried out, the one who'd been listed in the official report as recovered by a standard medevac team, no specific personnel noted. The one whose account of that night had been, according to the investigation that ended her career, inconsistent with field records. "He's been trying for 2 years, Solis said. The IG kept finding technical reasons to defer, but Martinez never stopped. And then Tate's statement yesterday, a second first-hand account from a different service member present at the scene." He leaned forward slightly. "Lena, the report was falsified. We've known it. We just couldn't prove it with enough specificity to force action. And now? Now we're closer." His voice was careful. "But I need to know something. The man who signed off on the investigation, Colonel Warren Dix, he's still in the system. He's been promoted twice since Coast." The name landed with the particular weight of something she'd been carrying for a long time. "What does that have to do with what I need to know right now?" she asked. "Because Dix has connections to this hospital. His brother-in-law sits on the board." She looked at him. "I know," Solis said. "You think the restructuring proposal? I don't think anything yet, but it's a connection I can't ignore." He held her gaze. "I need to know if there's anything that's happened here in the last 3 years. Anything that felt off. Anyone who seemed too interested in your history." She thought about Voss. about 14 months of targeted dismissal that had always felt slightly more deliberate than standard professional arrogance, about the way he'd pushed for her removal from trauma care specifically, not just generally, trauma care being the thing she was most qualified for and the thing that would most readily expose what she actually knew how to do. She thought about the closed-door meeting this morning, about a phone call from Naval Special Operations that had pulled Voss away before 7:30 a.m. "There's a physician," she said slowly, "the ER director. His name is Adrian Voss." Solis pulled out his phone. "Tell me about him," he said. She talked for 15 minutes. She gave him the facts without the interpretation, Voss's arrival timing, his specific targeting of her assignments, the restructuring proposal, the board connections Donna had referenced. Solis listened with the attentiveness she remembered, the kind that meant he was filing everything in a structure she couldn't see but trusted was organized. When she finished, he sat with it for a moment. "The board meeting is Thursday," she said. "I know. Reed is already in contact with the hospital administrator. Whatever the connection between Dix and the board member is, it's going to be examined." "That doesn't help me Thursday." "No," he admitted. "It doesn't." He was quiet for a beat. "Do you have documentation of anything Voss has said or done regarding your assignments?" "Donna Marsh does. She's the charge nurse. She's been tracking it." Something shifted in his expression. "You've been documenting." "Donna has been documenting. I've been practicing deliberate ignorance and hoping it resolved itself." "That sounds unlike you." "I changed." He looked at her for a long moment. Not the evaluating look of someone deciding something, the other kind, the kind that was just looking. "You didn't have to disappear." "I know." "We would have helped." "I know that too." She stood. Her break was almost over. "The choice I made got 4 people out alive. The record says I made an error. I made peace with the gap between those two things by not talking about it, and that worked fine until yesterday. Lena, I have to get back." She looked at him, took in the gray at his temples, the exhaustion around his eyes, the 4-hour overnight drive that was sitting somewhere in his posture. "You should eat something. The cafeteria is mediocre, but the soup is usually acceptable." He almost smiled. She hadn't seen that in 3 years either. "I'll find it." She walked back into the building. The afternoon brought new complications, as afternoons in a trauma center reliably did. A construction accident on the Clearwater Bay waterfront sent 2 workers into the ER at 2 p.m., one with a serious head injury, one with crush damage to his right hand and forearm that was going to require a surgical consult within the hour. Lena worked the head injury case alongside Webb, who was developing into something genuinely capable if he could learn to trust his instincts, and she watched him make 2 good calls in a row without prompting and said so when they stepped back. He looked slightly startled. "Thanks." "Don't be surprised. You made the right calls. Notice when you do that." He nodded, processing. She went back to work. By 3:30, both construction workers were stable and in the hands of the appropriate specialists. Lena was updating charts when Priya materialized at her shoulder with the expression she wore when she had information that was not going to improve anyone's day. "Voss called a nursing staff meeting for 4 o'clock, Priya said. "What kind of meeting?" "He said it was a post-trauma debrief, but he requested that all ICU and trauma nursing staff attend, including the charge nurses." Lena set her pen down. "All of them at once?" "All of them at once. A meeting that pulled all the senior trauma nursing staff out of rotation simultaneously wasn't a debrief. It was a demonstration of administrative authority, of the ability to reorganize the room at will. It was the kind of move that preceded a formal announcement. She found Donna in the medication room 2 minutes later. "Did you get the 4 o'clock notice?" "Just now." Donna's voice was carefully controlled. "He's moving early. He knows something changed this morning. The call from Reed's office rattled him, and he's trying to lock in the restructure before the board meeting instead of at it." Donna was quiet for a moment. Her hands were very still on the medication cart. "If he gets this through before Thursday, the nursing director will implement it fast. She's been waiting for board approval." "I know." "And if you're in med-surg when the military review—" "I know," Lena said again. They looked at each other. The medication room hummed with the refrigeration unit. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor alarmed briefly and then went quiet. "What do you need?" Donna asked. Is your documentation on Voss accessible right now? I can get it in 10 minutes. Bring it to the 4 o'clock meeting. Lena held her gaze. Everything you have, dated, sourced, in order. Donna studied her. The specific look of someone who was about to say, "Are you sure?" and then decided not to. Okay? Lena walked to the meeting. The conference room on the second floor held about 30 people comfortably. Voss had arranged the seating in a way that put him clearly at the front and the nursing staff in the rows, a geometry that was technically neutral and actually not. He was already there when Lena arrived, standing with his tablet, talking to the nursing director, a thin, precise woman named Helen Ostroff, who'd been at Harbor Ridge for 6 years and had opinions about efficiency that aligned conveniently with Voss's. Lena took a seat in the second row. Not the front, she wasn't performing defiance, but not the back either. The room filled. Donna arrived last, with a manila folder and the expression of someone who'd gone past calm into the specific territory of resolved. Voss waited until 4:02 and then started without preamble. He thanked everyone for yesterday's response to the military casualties, the language careful, the credit diffuse, attributed to the team and Harbor Ridge's systems in the way that made it about the institution rather than the people. Then he pivoted with professional smoothness to the restructuring proposal. He called it optimization. He said it 3 times in 4 sentences. Optimization, right-sizing resources, optimizing patient care delivery. He showed a slide. He had slides. He'd prepared slides for a meeting he'd called with 90 minutes notice, which told her everything about when he'd actually decided to do this, that distributed nursing assignments across the department in a way that moved the 5 most experienced trauma nurses, including Lena, into general care rotations. He framed it as opportunity. He used the word cross-training. He said the word growth twice. Nobody in the room said anything. Lena let 3 seconds pass. "I have a question," she said. Voss looked at her. The fractional pause before her name, if he'd been about to use it, didn't come. He just looked. Whitmore. The post-trauma period is a documented high-risk period for ICU patients, particularly in the first 72 hours. You have 3 critical military patients currently in the ICU. 2 of them were triaged and stabilized by trauma nursing staff who are on your reassignment list. She kept her voice even, her tone clinical. What's the protocol for covering the potential clinical gap during the transition period? Voss's expression didn't change exactly, but it tightened. The ICU has attending physicians. The ICU has attending physicians and nursing staff who know these patients' baselines. Continuity of nursing care is a significant factor in critical patient outcomes. The research is pretty unambiguous on that. The research is also unambiguous on the benefits of cross-departmental nursing experience, Ostroff said, and her voice had the precision of someone who'd been briefed. It is, Lena agreed. I'm not disputing the general principle. I'm asking about the specific implementation timeline given the specific patient population currently in the building. A small shift in the room, subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching. But she was watching, and 3 nurses in the second row had straightened fractionally, and Webb, who was technically a resident and shouldn't have been at this meeting at all but had apparently wandered in at the back, was very still. The timeline is a clinical and administrative decision, Voss said, not a nursing committee decision. Of course, she folded her hands on the table. I'm not suggesting it is. I'm asking the question so that if anyone asks me, patients, family members, the military liaison who's been in contact with our administrator today, I can give them an accurate answer about continuity of care. The military liaison phrase landed in the room the way she'd intended it to, as a fact, not a threat, a calm and informational statement that happened to do a great deal of work. Voss set his tablet down on the table. A small movement, a precise one. The military liaison's involvement is administrative. It doesn't intersect with clinical staffing decisions. I understand. I just want to make sure I can answer questions accurately. She paused. If the documentation supporting the reassignment is available to staff, I'd appreciate a copy. I want to make sure I understand the full clinical rationale. The documentation will be shared through appropriate channels before the board meeting. Thank you. She sat back. Donna, 1 seat to her right, kept her face carefully composed, but her hand, under the table, had set the manila folder down on her own knee. Voss continued. He covered 3 more items. He closed the meeting at 4:24. People began to move. Lena was standing when Voss said, at normal volume, but with the carrying quality of a man who'd chosen his moment, "Whitmore, a word." The room cleared. It took 90 seconds. Donna glanced at her on the way out, a glance with a question in it, and Lena gave the small nod that meant, "I'm okay." She wasn't sure she was okay. Voss waited until the room was empty. He stood at the head of the table and she stood 2/3 down, and the conference table between them was exactly as neutral and not as the meeting seating arrangement. "The military liaison," he said. "What exactly do you know about that?" "What I said. Our administrator got a call this morning. I heard about it through the department." She kept her hands relaxed at her sides. "I don't have any special information." "You were in the ICU at 9:20 this morning." "I was checking on patients from yesterday's trauma response. That's a standard part of follow-up care." "You were there for 40 minutes. She looked at him steadily. "I wasn't aware I was being timed." "I'm not timing you, Lena." He used her name with the full-weight version of the pause, but something had changed in it. It was slightly less like a ceiling and slightly more like something else, something less certain. "I'm trying to understand what's happening here." "I don't know what you mean." He looked at her. For a moment, the performance dropped. Not far, not completely, but enough that she could see the man behind the role, and the man was, for the first time in 14 months, uncertain. "The reassignment stands," he said. "I understand." "It's going to board Thursday." "I understand." He studied her. "You're not going to fight it." "I didn't say that." The uncertainty moved through his expression again. He picked up his tablet. "That's all." She walked to the door. "Whitmore." She stopped but didn't turn. "What were you before this?" "Before Harbor Ridge." She let 2 full seconds pass. "A nurse," she said, and walked out. Donna was in the hallway, folder in hand. "How bad?" Donna asked. "He's moving forward, but he's rattled." Lena kept walking. Donna matched her pace. "He asked what I was doing in the ICU. He knows something changed today, and he can't locate exactly what." "What did change today?" "Someone arrived." She hesitated, then made a decision. Donna had been documenting and protecting and showing up for 14 months, and that earned honesty. "His name is Solis. He's military. He's involved in a review of something that happened before I came to Harbor Ridge." Donna absorbed this without visible reaction, which was one of the things Lena had always appreciated about her. "Does Voss know him?" "No. But Voss knows that military command is interested in this hospital right now, and that's enough to make him nervous." She stopped near the stairwell door. "The folder. Can I make a copy?" Donna handed it over without hesitation. "I have a duplicate." Lena took it. "Thank you for all of this." "Don't thank me yet." But Donna's voice had something in it, a warmth she usually kept carefully rationed. "Just don't disappear on me when this is over." "I'm not planning to disappear." She meant it. She was surprised to realize she meant it. 3 years of careful disappearance, and somewhere in the past 24 hours, something had shifted in the way she thought about what came next. She went back to work. She worked until 7. She checked on Tate one more time before she left. His vitals were good, his color was better, and he was asleep, finally, which she was grateful for. She stopped at the nurse's station on her way out. Priya was starting the night shift, charting. She looked up. "You okay?" Priya asked. "Getting there," Lena said, which was different from fine and true, in a way that fine hadn't been for a while. She was almost to the elevator when her phone buzzed. A text from Solis. "Can you meet tonight?" Something came up with the Voss background. "It's significant." She looked at it for a long moment. The elevator opened. She got in. She typed back, "Where?" His reply came before the doors closed. "Your choice. Somewhere with coffee." She looked at her reflection in the elevator's polished doors. The scrubs, the folder tucked under her arm, the face of a woman who'd spent 3 years being someone smaller than she was. And she thought about Thursday's board meeting, and Reed's phone call, and Tate saying Raven in a trauma bay full of witnesses, and the documented evidence in the folder against her arm, and Voss asking, "What were you?" before this with genuine uncertainty for the first time in 14 months. She thought about Dix, about the board member who was his brother-in-law, about the fact that Solis had connected those two things in less than a day, which meant the connection wasn't difficult to find once you knew to look. The elevator reached the lobby. She walked through it, through the sliding front doors, out into the October air off the bay. She called Solis. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me," she said. "Voss," he said, "wasn't assigned to Harbor Ridge. He applied for it. Specifically. 14 months ago, 2 months after Dix's brother-in-law joined the board. His voice was controlled but not quite level. And there's more. His previous hospital in Seattle, I ran his personnel record through a contact at the Medical Licensing Board. There's a sealed disciplinary file, report falsification. The cold air off the bay came in off the water. The parking lot lights were just beginning to make sense against the darkening sky. He's done this before," she said. "He's done something like this before. The details are sealed, but the pattern—" Solis stopped. "Lena, someone placed him here. Someone who knew you were here and knew what you were doing and wanted to make sure that if the review ever moved, you would already be discredited and out of trauma care." The parking lot. The evening. The sound of the bay beyond the building's edge. She thought about 14 months of being called a floor nurse, of supply carts and logistics assignments, of she can barely handle a scalpel set in front of a room full of witnesses. Not arrogance. Architecture. "We need to move faster than Thursday," she said. "I know. Reed is already—" And then Solis stopped. A pause that was different from his other pauses. "Lena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "When am I not honest with you?" "The Coast Mission report. The part where you made the call to enter the hot zone without authorization." He was choosing his words very carefully. "The reason you took the blame, you said at the time it was your call and your responsibility. But Martinez's statement says you were following orders, that someone senior directed you to go in." The parking lot was very quiet. "Garrett," she said. "Who gave the order, Lena?" She looked at the hospital building behind her, the lit windows, the silhouette of Harbor Ridge against the October sky, the place where she'd spent 3 years being smaller than she was in order to survive something she hadn't deserved. Her jaw was tight. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "Dix," she said. "Warren Dix gave the order, and then he signed the report saying I'd acted alone." The silence on the line lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Solis said very quietly, "I need you to be willing to say that on the record." She looked at the bay, at the water that was the same, different and continuous. "Schedule the meeting," she said. She ended the call. She stood in the parking lot a moment longer. Then her phone rang again. A different number, one she didn't recognize, with a Fort Belmont area code. She answered. "Dr. Whitmore." A woman's voice, clipped, professional, carrying the specific weight of authority that didn't need to announce itself. "My name is Colonel Patricia Vane, Inspector General's office. I apologize for the hour. I've been informed that you may be willing to provide a formal statement regarding the Coast Province incident." A pause. "I have to tell you that as of 30 minutes ago, we received a second piece of evidence that we were not expecting. It changes the timeline of our review significantly." Lena's breath was very still. "What kind of evidence?" she asked. "A communication log," Colonel Vane said. "From 2019. Authenticated. It contains an exchange between 2 senior officers in the hours before the Coast operation." Her voice was careful, precise, the voice of someone delivering information that they understood the weight of. "One of the officers is Warren Dix. The other is currently serving in a civilian capacity." Lena's hand tightened on the phone. "Dr. Whitmore, the second officer in the communication log is a member of your hospital's board of directors." The name landed like a physical thing, not Dix, not the military sides of this. She'd known that was coming, had felt it moving toward her since Reed's first phone call, had been building herself toward it the way you build toward something that's going to hurt, regardless of how prepared you are. The military piece she could handle. She'd been carrying the Dix problem for 3 years, and she knew its shape. But the board member. "Which one?" she asked. Her voice came out flat, which was not the same as calm but functioned similarly. "A man named Richard Calder," Colonel Vane said. "He joined the Harbor Ridge Board approximately 16 months ago. Prior to that, he served as a civilian defense contractor with significant DoD oversight relationships." 16 months ago. Voss had arrived 14 months ago. The board member had arrived 2 months before Voss, which was exactly what Solis had said. Someone placed him here, and now she had the name of the someone. Richard Calder. She'd heard the name once, in passing, in a board meeting summary that Donna had shared because Donna shared everything she thought Lena might eventually need. She'd filed it without significance. She was filing it differently now. "What's in the communication log?" she asked. "I can't share specifics over the phone," Vane said. "What I can tell you is that it establishes a pre-operational conversation between Dix and Calder about the Coast mission. The content is relevant to the question of who authorized the entry and why the mission report was structured the way it was." She paused. "Dr. Whitmore, I want to be direct with you. The evidence we have is strong enough to reopen formally. What we need from you is a first-hand account to anchor it. Without your statement, we have communication, which is significant, but we don't have the complete chain." "I understand. I need to ask, are you willing?" The parking lot. The bay. The lights of Harbor Ridge behind her, every lit window a room she'd worked in, a patient she'd sat with, a version of herself she'd constructed out of necessity and gotten better at than she'd expected. "Yes," she said. "I'm willing. We'll need to do this formally. There's a process. I know the process." She'd sat through an investigation once. She knew exactly how the process worked, from the inside and from the side where it went wrong. When? Given the board meeting Thursday and the potential for Calder to be informed of our interests before we're ready, we'd like to move quickly, tomorrow, if possible. "What time?" 10 a.m. We can come to you, or I'll come to you. Text me the address. She was already thinking through her shift, through who would need to know, through how many things needed to move simultaneously. "Colonel Vane, the sealed disciplinary file on Adrian Voss from his previous hospital in Seattle. I understand it's sealed, but if there's a mechanism to request access given the scope of what you're looking at..." "That's already in motion," Vane said. "We identified it 2 hours ago." Of course they had. When the IG's office moved, it moved with the thoroughness of an institution that had learned expensively what incomplete investigations looked like. "I'll be there at 10, Lena said. She ended the call. Stood in the parking lot for 4 more seconds. Then she called Solis. He picked up on half a ring. "I just got the same call from Vane's office." "You knew about Calder?" "I knew there was a board member with DoD connections. I didn't have a name until 20 minutes ago." His voice had the quality of someone who was genuinely angry and managing it with effort. "Richard Calder. He was Dix's operations liaison for 3 years. They co-authored 2 classified training protocol documents in 2017 and 2018. The relationship is documented and long. He's been on the board 16 months. Voss arrived 14 months ago. 2 months to set it up. Long enough to get the right physician applied and credentialed and in position." A pause. "Lena, this isn't just about you. This is about making sure that if the Coast review ever gained traction, you would already be professionally compromised. If you're a floor nurse who got quietly moved to MedSurg, your testimony has a different weight than if you're a trauma physician with an active clinical record." She'd known this. She'd known it in the parking lot 5 minutes ago, when the architecture of the last 14 months rearranged itself into a shape she could see completely. Knowing it didn't make it easier to hold. It made it harder, actually. The specific weight of understanding that the dismissal, the public humiliations, the supply cart, and the logistics assignments had not been random cruelty, but planned erosion. "I'm meeting with Vane tomorrow at 10, she said. "I'll be there." "You don't have to, Lena." His voice was very even. "I'll be there." She didn't argue. "I need to make a call to Donna tonight. She has documentation on Voss that the IG is going to want. Send me her contact information. I'll have Vane's office reach out through official channels so it's properly documented." "Okay." She paused. "Garrett, if this moves the way it looks like it's going to move, the board meeting Thursday, Voss presenting the restructuring proposal, Calder in the room. I know. If they lock the restructure in before the review surfaces, they won't." He said it with a certainty she would have questioned, except that she knew him well enough to know he didn't say things like that unless he'd thought through why they were true. The IG's office has the authority to issue a hold on any administrative action that intersects with an active investigation. Vane is drafting it tonight. She exhaled slowly. Okay. Go home. Get some sleep. Don't make any calls or decisions tonight that you wouldn't make in daylight. I'm not. I know you're not. I'm saying it anyway. A pause. You did good today. She almost laughed. I argued with a hospital administrator about needle angles. You did more than that and you know it. She didn't answer that. She got in her car. She drove home. She did not sleep well, but she slept, which was its own kind of progress. She was back at Harbor Ridge by 6:50 the next morning. The overnight charge nurse briefed her in 11 minutes, which was fast and thorough the way good overnight briefings were. All 3 Marines were stable. Farrell had been extubated at 3 a.m. and was breathing on his own, which was earlier than expected, and was the kind of news that reset the day towards something survivable. Okafor was sitting up and had eaten half a hospital breakfast, which his chart noted with the specific understated triumph of ICU nursing. Tate was sleeping and had not, according to the night nurse, talked in his sleep, which the night nurse mentioned as an observation and Lena received as information. She checked on Farrell first this time. He was awake, the particular raw-edged wakefulness of a man whose body had very recently been in a crisis it hadn't fully catalogued yet. His eyes tracked when she came in, and he managed something that was almost a coherent expression. Staff Sergeant Farrell, she said. She checked his monitor, his breathing, which was shallow but present, doing its own work. How does it feel? Like someone reached into my chest and rearranged the furniture. His voice was a wreck. Which I'm told is approximately what happened. Approximately accurate. She listened to his lung sounds, the right side clear, the left side with the residual roughness that would smooth over the next 48 hours if he kept breathing carefully. The ventilator came out at 3. You're doing better than projected. What's the damage report? Surgically repaired tension pneumothorax, significant shrapnel removal, 2 cracked ribs. The ribs are going to be the most uncomfortable part for the next 6 weeks. She made notes on the chart. Nothing permanent, if you're careful. Careful's not really my specialty. Consider this a learning opportunity. She put the chart back, looked at him directly. He had the face of a man who hadn't processed yet that he'd almost died, which was common in the first 24 hours post-crisis. Sergeant Farrell, do you know a woman named Lena Whitmore? He looked at her. The question sat between them. I know a call sign, he said carefully. I don't know if that's the same thing. It might be. She held his gaze. I'm going to be away from the hospital between 10 and noon today. If anything changes with your condition, ask for Dr. Watanabe. She did your surgery. She's excellent. And if I need... He stopped, reassessed. Okay. She nodded and walked out. The IG field office was in a federal building 12 minutes from Harbor Ridge, on the 3rd floor behind a set of glass doors that said nothing on them except a suite number. Lena arrived at 9:53. Solis was already there. He was leaning against the wall outside the doors with a paper coffee cup and the slightly worn quality of a man who'd slept in his car, which she suspected was literally true. He handed her the second coffee cup. She took it. Ready? He said. I've been ready for 3 years. Colonel Patricia Vane was 51, compact, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses that she wore on a chain and didn't use. She ran the meeting the way experienced investigators ran meetings. She created space, asked open questions, and then got very quiet in a way that made most people fill the silence with more than they'd intended to say. Lena had been trained in enough interview context to recognize the technique and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she didn't mind it. The technique worked because the interviewee had something to give. She had a great deal to give. She gave it. 2 hours and 40 minutes. She started with the Night of the Coast mission. The briefing. Dix's verbal authorization delivered in a room with no recording equipment, the specific language he'd used, the specific decision he'd made, and then attributed to her in the report. She talked about Martinez, about carrying him out of an active sector with 2 other casualties, about the medevac that arrived 40 minutes after she'd secured the area. She talked about the investigation. The investigator who'd been courteous and thorough and had worked, she now understood, from a document set that had been pre-shaped. She talked about the choice she'd made when the investigation concluded, the choice to accept the outcome and disappear, and why she'd made it. Vane listened. She asked clarifying questions at precise moments, Questions that established timeline, established witness positions, established the chain of authorization. She wasn't trying to catch Lena in anything. She was building structure. Solis was present but largely silent, which was intentional. His role was witness and support, and he understood the boundary. When it was over, Vane set down her pen and took off her reading glasses, even though she hadn't used them. "Dr. Whitmore," she said, "I want to be clear about where this stands. The evidence we have is significant. Your statement today materially strengthens it. We are moving toward formal charges against Colonel Warren Dix for falsification of military records and conduct unbecoming, and toward a referral to the DOJ regarding Richard Calder's role in what appears to be a sustained effort to obstruct a potential investigation." Lena absorbed this. "What's the timeline?" "We'd like to move before Thursday. Ideally, Calder is served with notice of investigation before he's in a position to vote on anything at Harbor Ridge's board meeting." Vane's voice was level. "That may not be possible, but it's the objective." "And Voss?" "Dr. Voss is adjacent. The sealed file from Seattle is now unsealed. It involves a patient outcome report that was altered to protect a colleague. He was sanctioned privately rather than publicly, which was a failure on the part of the licensing board at the time." Vane's jaw tightened briefly. "That's a medical board matter, not an IG matter, but the medical board will be receiving our documentation. So he stays at Harbor Ridge. For now, I understand that's not—" "I understand how jurisdiction works," Lena said. "Not with heat, just with clarity. I'm asking so I know what the situation is when I walk back into that building this afternoon." "The situation is that you walk in with more support than you had yesterday, which is not nothing." "No," she agreed, "it's not nothing." She was back at Harbor Ridge by 1:15. She had 45 minutes before her shift technically restarted, and she used 30 of them to find Donna. Donna was in the break room, eating a late lunch, and she looked up when Lena came in with the specific expression of someone who'd been waiting. "The IG contacted me this morning," Donna said. "I know, I'm sorry. I should have warned you sooner." "No, you should have done exactly what you did." Donna pushed the chair across from her out with one foot, the particular invitation of someone who didn't waste gestures. "Sit." Lena sat. "How did it go?" "It went." She rubbed the back of her neck. "They're moving faster than I expected. There's a board member involved, a man named Richard Calder. He has a documented prior relationship with the military officer who falsified my investigation report." Donna was very still. "He joined the board 16 months ago." "I know." "And Voss arrived." "I know." A beat. "I should have connected that." "How would you have? You didn't know about the Coast investigation. Nobody here knew." Donna's hands were flat on the table. She had the look of someone recalibrating, not emotionally, but structurally, the way you recalibrate when a map has been wrong and you need to replace everything on a new grid. "The documentation I gave the IG this morning, the Voss file, they said it was relevant." "It is." "His sealed disciplinary record from Seattle is now open. Pattern, behavior." Lena paused. "Donna, the board meeting Thursday. The IG is trying to serve Calder with notice before then. If they succeed, his position on the board is compromised and the restructuring vote can't go forward cleanly. And if they don't, then I'm in med-surg by Friday and the review proceeds without me in trauma care." She said it evenly. "Which is the point, which is what this whole thing was designed to accomplish." Donna was quiet for a moment. "I have one more document you don't know about." She picked up her lunch bag and pulled a folded sheet from inside it. The kind of careful concealment that Lena recognized as someone who'd been thinking ahead for longer than today. 3 weeks ago, Voss had a private meeting with Calder in the hospital. I documented the date and time because Calder signed in at the front desk, and I happened to be at the charge desk. His reason for the visit listed on the sign-in log was board business. She set the paper on the table. "I kept the copy of the sign-in log." Lena looked at the paper. 3 weeks ago. 14 months after Voss arrived, 3 weeks ago they'd had a documented in-person meeting at the hospital. The IG would want this. "I need to send this to Colonel Vane today." "Already photographed and emailed," Donna said. 20 minutes ago." Lena looked at her. "I'm not new at this," Donna said mildly. "I've been doing this job for 28 years. I know what a paper trail looks like when it matters." She got back to the floor at 2 p.m. The afternoon was quieter than the day before. A respiratory case, a pediatric fracture, two post-surgical follow-ups that she managed with the automated competence of long practice. She was good at this even when she was doing three other things in her head simultaneously, which was something she'd never quite decided was a virtue or a defense mechanism. At 3:30, she was in Bay 1 with a post-op patient when her pager went off. ICU. Feral. She was moving before she'd consciously decided to move. She heard it before she reached the room, the particular rapid exchange of voices that meant something had changed and changed fast. The alarms, the short-clipped commands of nurses who were competent and working. She pushed through the door. Farrell was in acute respiratory distress. His oxygen saturation, which had been sitting comfortably at 96 when she'd checked him this morning, was now at 84 and dropping. He was working visibly for every breath, the accessory muscles of his neck engaged, his face wrong in the way a face got when the body understood it wasn't getting enough of what it needed. The ICU nurse, a steady woman named Gloria, who Lena trusted, was already on the phone with surgical. "How long?" Lena asked, moving to the bedside. "About 8 minutes. It came on fast." Gloria had one hand on Farrell's arm and her eyes on the monitor. "Surgical is 4 minutes out. But his SATs?" Lena was already listening to his chest. Left side, where the surgery had been, where the pneumothorax had been managed, where she'd watched Voss place the decompression needle with 1 degree of adjustment and then told herself it was fine. It was not fine. The sounds told her what the numbers were telling her and what the visual presentation was telling her, all in the same fraction of a second. Re-expansion pulmonary edema, which was a known complication of treating tension pneumothorax, which could have been anticipated, which happened in a percentage of cases, and which was not happening cleanly. The left lung wasn't working the way it should be this quickly, post-decompression. There was fluid accumulating where air was supposed to be. "What's his PEEP setting?" she asked. "I was back on monitoring oxygen, but not on the ventilator." He'd been extubated at 3 a.m., which had been the right call at 3 a.m. "He's on high-flow nasal, 7 liters. Not enough. She could see it wasn't enough. The attending who was supposed to be on ICU coverage today was Dr. Frank Ogden, a hospitalist who was competent with routine critical care and was genuinely out of his depth with a post-thoracic complication of this specific type. She knew this because she'd worked with him for 2 years. She didn't say it. She picked up the phone herself. "I need Dr. Watanabe in the ICU now," she said. "Farrell is in respiratory distress, suspected re-expansion edema. His SATs are at 82. Dr. Watanabe is in surgery. She needs to be reached, now. This is her patient." She hung up. Farrell was looking at her with the eyes of a man who understood that something significant was happening to him and was managing his response to that by focusing on the nearest competent person. She met his eyes. "I've got you," she said. Same words as yesterday. She meant them the same way. "Is it bad?" His voice was a thread. "It's manageable," which was true if they moved quickly and correctly. "I need you to try to slow your breathing. I know that feels wrong. Slow it anyway. Small breaths. Don't fight it." "Okay." He was trying. She could see him trying, the specific, effortful discipline of a man who'd been trained to do hard things in his body on command. "Good. Keep going." Dr. Ogden arrived at the door. He took in the scene, the monitor numbers, the patient's presentation, Lena's position at the bedside, and moved into the room with the controlled urgency of someone who'd registered that this was outside his primary expertise and was making a rapid decision about what that meant. "Walk me through it," he said to Lena, which was, she thought, the most professionally admirable sentence he could have said under the circumstances. She walked him through it in 30 seconds. Ogden listened. He asked one clarifying question, about the original surgery, about the scope of the pneumothorax, and she answered it. "Watanabe needs to be here," he said. "I've called." "If she can't get here in time?" Lena looked at the monitor. 81, still dropping. "Then we manage it until she can." She looked at Ogden. "His chest x-ray from this morning. Do you have it?" "On the system." "Pull it up. I want to compare the left lung field to what I'm seeing now, and I need a point-of-care ultrasound in here." Ogden moved. Gloria moved. Lena kept her hands on Farrell, kept her voice steady, kept the room calibrated at the particular frequency of controlled emergency that was the difference between recoverable and not. The ultrasound arrived in 4 minutes. Lena ran the probe herself. Lateral approach, left side. And yes, there it was. The fluid accumulation she'd suspected, the B-lines that indicated pulmonary edema, the picture of a lung that had expanded too fast after a prolonged compression and was now paying the price. "We need a thoracentesis tray," she said. Ogden looked at her. "That's a physician procedure." "I know. Are you—" "I'm aware of what I am and am not licensed to perform in this setting." She kept her voice level. "I'm telling you what the patient needs. You make the call." He looked at the monitor. 79. "Get the tray," he said to Gloria. The tray came. Ogden set up. Lena talked him through the positioning. She'd done this procedure dozens of times in settings that made this look straightforward, and she could see in Ogden's hands that he'd done it a handful of times in controlled conditions, and the difference was significant, and she was going to close that difference by staying right here and keeping her voice even. 45 degrees, she said. Slightly more posterior. Yes, right there. He went in. The needle seated correctly. The fluid came, straw-colored, which was better than bloody, which meant the edema was fluid and not hemorrhage, which meant this was manageable. Farrell's saturation hit 78, and then, as the pressure released, began the slow climb back. 79, 81, 84. Dr. Watanabe arrived at the door 11 minutes after Lena's call, still in her surgical cap, and she read the room in approximately 2 seconds. "Tell me," she said. Lena told her. Watanabe listened, looked at the ultrasound image on the screen, looked at Farrell, looked at the monitor reading 91 and climbing. "Good call," Watanabe said. She said it to the room, but she was looking at Lena. "All of it. Good call." Lena stepped back and let Watanabe take over. She stood at the edge of the room and felt the specific exhaustion that comes after sustained focus. Not physical exhaustion, but the depletion of having held something difficult with complete attention for 20 minutes and then put it down. Farrell looked at her from his bed. His color was coming back. His eyes were clearer. "Raven," he said quietly. "Just her and him. That's the second time." She looked at him. "Rest," she said. He nodded, closed his eyes. The hallway outside the ICU was empty when she stepped into it, and she stood against the wall for 30 seconds and did nothing except be in her body and let the last 20 minutes settle. She was doing that, eyes closed, back against the wall, when she heard footsteps and opened her eyes to find Voss. He'd come from the elevator. He looked at her standing in the hallway and at the closed ICU door and at whatever her face was doing, and he stopped. "Farrell," he said. "Re-expansion pulmonary edema. He's stabilized. Watanabe is with him." Voss absorbed this. He moved toward the ICU door, then stopped. He had the expression of a man who was doing the math of the situation. What had happened? Who'd been there? What it meant for the version of events he'd been constructing. "Who caught it?" he asked. She held his gaze. "I was paged." "You're not ICU assigned today." "I know." The silence between them had weight. He was looking at her with the expression she'd seen last night. That fracture in the certainty. That specific quality of a man reconsidering a premise he'd committed to. "How did you know it was edema?" he asked. "From the presentation. The sounds, and the ultrasound confirmed it. You ran the ultrasound yourself." "I assisted with the assessment. Dr. Ogden made the clinical decisions." He looked at her for a long moment. She could not read what was behind his eyes. Not fully. There was something there. Something that was not the dismissal she'd lived with for 14 months, but she couldn't determine what it was replacing the dismissal with. "The board meeting is Thursday," he said. "I'm aware." "The restructuring proposal." He stopped. Started again. "The proposal is on the agenda." "I know." "I want you to understand something." He said it carefully, the careful way of a man who wasn't sure what he was about to say until he said it. "When I came to Harbor Ridge, I was given a specific brief about the staffing situation, specific recommendations about personnel." She was very still. "Who gave you the recommendations?" He didn't answer immediately. "Adrian." She said his first name deliberately, the way you use a first name to cut through the professional architecture and get to the person. "Who told you to target my position?" "It wasn't—" He stopped. It was framed as a performance assessment, a clinical evaluation. From whom? His jaw was tight. She watched something move through him. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent. The specific discomfort of a man who'd done something he could have questioned and hadn't, and was now standing in the corridor of a hospital where a nurse had just saved a patient's life using skills that weren't supposed to exist, confronting the gap between what he'd been told and what he'd seen. "Richard Calder," he said, "before I accepted the position. He called me as a board representative. He said there was a staffing situation that needed addressing. He framed it as improving clinical standards." She absorbed this. Calder had briefed Voss directly before he arrived, which meant Voss had come to Harbor Ridge with a mission, possibly without fully understanding it was a mission. "Mission. Did you know why?" she asked. "I thought I was cleaning up a poorly managed department." He said it with the particular defensiveness of someone who knows the words sound worse than they felt at the time. "I thought the nursing assessments were legitimate, but they weren't. I don't—" He stopped again. The difficulty of this moment was visible on his face, and she let herself see it fully, not with sympathy, and not without it, but with the particular clear attention of someone who needed to know exactly what she was dealing with. "I saw what the documentation said. I implemented what it recommended." "You implemented it with a lot of enthusiasm," she said. Quiet. Not cruel, but not soft. He looked away. First time he'd looked away from her in this entire conversation. "Thursday," she said, "the restructuring proposal. If you move forward with it, you're going to be presenting at a board meeting where a member of that board is currently under investigation by the Inspector General's office." She paused. "I'm telling you this not as a threat. I'm telling you because you should have complete information before you walk into that room." His head came back around. His eyes were sharp now. "What investigation?" "You should probably speak to a lawyer before Thursday," she said. "I'm serious. Not because I'm threatening you. Because I think you're a physician who made decisions under a framework someone else constructed, and how clearly you understand that in the next 48 hours is going to matter." She walked back toward the nursing station. Her hands were steady. Her chest was doing something complicated that she was going to examine later, in private, when she had the space for it. Tate was awake when she checked on him at 6. He'd heard from other Marines on the unit that Farrell had had a setback. Hospitals were permeable places. Information moved through them like water through sand. And he was sitting up, edged toward anxious, which was not good for his own recovery. "He's okay," she said before he could ask. "Stable. Watanabe is managing it." Tate exhaled. His hands relaxed on the blanket. "You were there," he said. Not a question. "I was paged." "Right." His voice was dry. "Raven gets paged for the impossible cases." "Don't call me that here." "I know. Sorry." He looked at her. "Solis called me. He said the meeting with the IG went. He said it was significant." "It was. He also said you gave a full account. The authorization, Dix, all of it." She sat in the chair beside his bed. Something she rarely did. It violated a particular internal rule she had about professional distance. But she was tired and the room was quiet and Tate looked like someone who needed to not be talked down at. "I did." "How was that?" She thought about it. "Harder than I expected, and easier by the end." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I've been carrying the shape of that night for 3 years. Saying it out loud to people who were writing it down and treating it as evidence rather than error. It was different." "Different how?" "Like it became true in a different way. Not just mine." He nodded. He understood that, she could see. He was a person who lived in institutional frameworks, who knew the difference between a thing that happened and a thing that was documented to have happened. "What comes next?" he asked. "The IG is trying to serve Calder with notice before the board meeting Thursday. If they do, the restructuring vote can't proceed cleanly. If they don't," she paused, "it's still going to be okay. It's just going to be messier." "You're not worried." "I'm worried," she said. I'm also functional while worried. Those aren't mutually exclusive." He almost smiled. "Raven to the end." "Go to sleep, Corporal." She went back to the nursing station, finished her charting, did the last round of the day. It was 7:05 when she checked her phone and found 2 things. A text from Solis saying Vane is moving on Calder tomorrow morning, and a missed call from a number she recognized as the hospital administrator's direct line. She called back. The administrator, a man named Douglas Hurst, who had the particular administrator quality of being simultaneously decisive and deferential depending on which direction the institutional wind was blowing, picked up immediately. "Nurse Whitmore," he said, "thank you for calling back. I wanted to speak with you before tomorrow." A pause that had things in it. "I received a second call from Naval Special Operations Medical Command this afternoon. A Commander Reed. He indicated that there may be some personnel matters at Harbor Ridge that intersect with an active federal investigation." "I see," she said. "He indicated that you might be—" He used the phrase materially affected. "That's accurate." Another pause. "I want you to know that the hospital's position is one of full cooperation with any federal investigation, and that any administrative action related to staff reassignment will be reviewed carefully in light of any new information." He was walking it back. Carefully, in the language of administration, but unmistakably walking it back. The board member he'd taken direction from was about to be served with federal notice, and Douglas Hurst had a very good instinct for which direction the wind was blowing. "Thank you, Mr. Hurst," she said. "I appreciate you letting me know." She ended the call. Donna was at the end of the hallway, watching her with the expression of someone who'd been watching from a distance and had made several accurate inferences. "Administrator called," Donna said. "Walked back the reassignment. Informally, in lawyer language, but yes." Donna let out a breath that had been in her chest for some time. "Good." "It's not over," Lena said. "No, but it's different than it was yesterday." Lena looked at the hospital around her, the hallway, the nurses' station, the closed ICU doors, the floor she'd worked for 3 years with her head down and her hands busy, and felt, underneath the exhaustion and the residual adrenaline and the particular complicated weight of a day that had been several days compressed into one, something she hadn't felt in a long time, something that didn't have a single clean name but was in the neighborhood of solid, of oriented, of present in a way she hadn't been. She was still here. That mattered, apparently. Her phone buzzed. Solace. A text. "Get some rest. Big day tomorrow." She typed back. "Defined as?" His answer came in 30 seconds. "Calder gets served at 9 a.m. Reedy's office is requesting a formal meeting at Harbor Ridge at 11. And Martinez is flying in tonight. He wants to see you." She stopped walking. Danny Martinez, the man she'd carried out of Coast Province on her own, back through an active sector in the dark, who'd given a statement to the IG 6 months ago and kept giving it, who'd been trying for 2 years to make the official record match what had actually happened. She stood in the hallway of Harbor Ridge Military Medical Center at 7:15 in the evening and read the message, and something behind her sternum did a thing she didn't have words for. A slow, profound unlock, the specific sensation of a door that had been sealed for a very long time beginning, finally, to open. She was still standing there when the overhead intercom crackled. "Trauma alert. Single incoming. ETA 6 minutes. GSW to the abdomen. Unstable vitals." She was already moving, the way she always moved, the way she would always move, the pull of it, ancient and absolute. She was halfway to the trauma bay when her radio crackled with Gloria's voice from the ICU, tight and urgent in the way that meant now. "Whitmore. Farrell is coding." She made the decision in 2 steps. First step, the trauma bay. The GSW was incoming with 6 minutes on the clock and unstable vitals, which meant whoever was in that bay needed every competent person Harbor Ridge could give them. She was already halfway there. Second step, the ICU. Farrell was coding, which meant Gloria had a crash cart and was running a resuscitation and needed a physician, not a nurse, and Dr. Ogden was on ICU coverage tonight and was 3 minutes away at most. She hit her radio. "Bay 1. Who's primary on the GSW?" Webb's voice came back. "Me. Priya's with me." "I'm 30 seconds out." She changed direction. Toward the ICU. "Ogden. Farrell is coding ICU. Now." Ogden's response was already moving before the word finished. She didn't wait for confirmation. She pushed through the ICU doors at a full run, which was not something she did on a hospital floor, and she did it anyway. The crash cart was positioned. Gloria was doing compressions, correct depth, correct rate, her face set with the specific controlled intensity of someone who'd run codes before and knew what they were doing. The monitor showed ventricular fibrillation, which was not the worst thing Lena could have found, because VF was shockable, because they had something to work with. "How long?" she asked, reaching for the defibrillator paddles. 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Gloria didn't break rhythm. He went into it fast, no warning. Resume after charge. She was already charging. The defibrillator whined to its pitch. Clear. Gloria stepped back. Lena delivered the shock. Farrell's body responded the way bodies respond. A single full convulsion, then stillness. She watched the monitor. 3 seconds. 4. Sinus rhythm. Rough at the edges, with the irregular quality of a heart that had just been frightened back into function, but sinus. Working. She exhaled through her nose and put the paddles down. "Get Watanabe on the phone," she said, "and page cardiology." She was already checking his IV access, checking his breathing. He hadn't lost his airway, which was the first thing you checked and always would be. "He needs continuous monitoring tonight, not the automated kind." "I'll sit with him," Gloria said. "I know you will." She looked at Farrell's face. His color was returning in the particular incremental way of a body reassembling itself after a catastrophic interruption. Not fast, not clean, but present. Alive. "I'll check back in an hour." Ogden arrived at the door 30 seconds later, slightly breathless. She gave him a 12-second handoff, sure rhythm restored, suspected arrhythmia. Secondary to the pulmonary edema, and the physiological stress of the day, cardiology paged, Watanabe needed. Ogden absorbed it and nodded. She went to the trauma bay. Webb had the GSW patient, a man in his 40s, 2 gunshot wounds to the right lower quadrant, blood pressure in the low 80s. Critical, but not the unsalvageable kind of critical if they moved correctly. Webb was moving correctly. Priya had 2 large bore lines running, blood products were on the warmer, the surgical resident had been called. Lena took the secondary position without being asked and without announcing herself, just stepped into the gap on the left side of the bay and started working. Webb registered her presence and kept going, which was the right call. She was there to support, not to take over. The patient's pressure stabilized at 94/60 by the time the surgical team arrived. The handoff took 4 minutes. They took him up to the OR. Webb peeled off his gloves. His hands were shaking slightly, not from incompetence, but from the particular physical reaction of someone who'd operated at the edge of their capability and had stayed there long enough for the adrenaline to start having opinions. "Good work," she said. He looked at her. He was 29, and he had seen in the last 30 hours things that would take him years to fully process. "Is Farrell okay?" Word traveled. He coded. "He's back. Cardiology is on it." Webb sat down on the edge of the supply cart. Just for a second. Just a moment of being a person in a body that had been through something. "This job," he said, without finishing the sentence. "Yeah," she said. That was all either of them said about it. Sometimes that was the right amount. She got back to the ICU at 8:40. Farrell was awake, barely, with the fragile, stripped quality of someone who'd been somewhere very dark, very briefly, and come back to find the ordinary world slightly translucent. Cardiology had been there and gone. His rhythm was holding. Watanabe's notes in the chart were thorough and careful and recommended a cardiac monitoring extension for the next 72 hours, which was the right call. She sat in the chair beside his bed. She was tired in the way that went past physical. "I heard," Farrell said. His voice was rough. "Gloria told me." "It's taken care of." "You were there." "I was paged." He was quiet for a moment. The monitor traced its steady green peaks. Outside the window, Clearwater Bay was dark. The marina lights scattered across the water like something had been dropped and left there. "In 2019, he said carefully, "I wasn't at Khost. I was at Kandahar." He stopped, started again. "But I knew the guys who were. I knew what happened, and I knew what the report said, and those were 2 different things." He looked at her. "I didn't know your name until Tate said it, but I knew the call sign. Everybody who was in country that year knew the call sign." She was very still. "The woman who carried Martinez out," he said, "through an active sector, with 2 other casualties." He shook his head slightly. "That's not an error in judgment. That's not what an error in judgment looks like." "No," she said, "it's not. I'm sorry it took this long." She thought about what to say. Settled on, Get some sleep, Sergeant. She left him, walked to the elevator, pressed the button and stood and waited. And in the 10 seconds it took for the elevator to arrive, she was, briefly, not managing anything. Just standing, just tired, just a person who had run a resuscitation and a trauma stabilization back to back, and was now standing in a hospital hallway at 8:45 p.m., and it was exactly as unglamorous and exhausting and necessary as it sounds. Her phone buzzed. Solis. Martinez landed. He's at the Bayview Hotel. Wants to know if you'll meet him tonight. She got in the elevator, thought for 4 floors. She typed back. Tomorrow. After the IG meeting. Tell him I'll be there. A pause. Then, he said to tell you he's been waiting 3 years. He can wait 1 more day. She pocketed her phone, got off at the ground floor, walked out into the October night. She was at the Federal Building at 9 a.m. the next morning. Solis was already there. He handed her a coffee, the same way he had yesterday, the same unremarkable gesture, and said, Calder was served 40 minutes ago. How did he respond? He's already lawyered up, fast. He held the door, which is actually useful. It means he knew exactly what the investigation was about, without Vane having to explain much. She walked through the door. Voss? He called the hospital administrator this morning, asked to postpone Thursday's board presentation. Solis said it evenly. Hurst agreed. The restructuring proposal has been tabled. She absorbed this as she walked. Tabled. Not killed, tabled. But for now, off the agenda, which meant off her back, which meant the specific threat of Thursday had dissolved before it arrived, and she was not going to let herself feel anything too large about that until she was somewhere private. Vane's meeting was shorter today, focused, precise, a final review of Lena's statement before it was formally filed, a walkthrough of the evidence chain. Vane presented the communication log between Dix and Calder. Lena read it. It was in the dry, factual language of a documented conversation between 2 people who thought they were being careful, damning in a way that didn't require interpretation. Dix had written, The review will not gain traction if the primary witness is professionally discredited. Calder will handle the hospital placement. The physician candidate is already identified. And then, 6 days later, candidate confirmed. Arrives at Harbor Ridge in 8 weeks. 8 weeks. Voss had arrived at Harbor Ridge 14 months ago. The math was exact. She set the document down, looked at Vane. This is enough, she said. It is, Vane agreed. Combined with Martinez's statement, your testimony, and Tate's statement, we have a complete chain. We're filing formal charges against Dix today. Calder is being referred to the DOJ. She paused. Dr. Whitmore, your military record. The official classification of the Coast incident as an error in judgment. That classification is being formally reversed. We're in the process of preparing a corrected record. The words landed slowly, one at a time, each one requiring its own moment. A corrected record. 3 years of carrying the official version and knowing it was wrong, and now the official version was going to say something different, something true. What does that mean practically? She asked. Her voice was steady. She was very deliberately not letting it be anything else. It means your military medical credentials are fully reinstated. Your rank is restored. Any civilian medical licensing affected by the original classification, which we understand includes a restriction on your hospital-level privileges, is cleared. Vane looked at her over her desk with the particular directness of a person who knew she was delivering something significant and wasn't going to dress it up. You can practice as a physician, Dr. Whitmore, without qualification or restriction. Solis beside her said nothing. She was grateful for that. She looked at her hands in her lap. They were steady. She was surprised by that. She'd thought when this moment eventually came, there would be more visible reaction from her body. But her hands were just her hands, steady and slightly calloused and familiar. Thank you, she said. You did the hard part, Vane said. We just followed the paperwork. Well, the IG meeting at Harbor Ridge at 11 was a different kind of formal. Vane came with 2 agents. Commander Reed came with a lieutenant. Solis came as a witness. Lena came as herself, in her Harbor Ridge scrubs, her badge clipped to her chest, because she had a shift starting at noon, and she was not going to let this day become an excuse not to show up for her patients. Administrator Hurst met them in the conference room. He had the look of a man who'd been expecting this, and was very carefully being as cooperative as possible in real time. Richard Calder was not present. He was, Vane confirmed briefly, in a private meeting with his attorney. Vane outlined the investigation. She did not elaborate beyond what was necessary. She established the connection between Calder and Dix, the documented placement of Voss at Harbor Ridge with specific instructions, and the federal investigation that was now active. She recommended that the board take immediate action regarding Calder's position, and she said the word recommended in a tone that communicated it was not a suggestion. Hirsch said, "Of course." He said it without hesitation, which meant he'd already decided this before walking into the room. Reed spoke next. He outlined the reversal of the Coast classification, the restoration of Lena's credentials, and the military's formal position that Dr. Whitmore's actions on the night in question had been correct, had been authorized, and he used the word authorized with precise weight, and had been documented incorrectly in the official record due to actions that were now the subject of criminal investigation. The room was quiet, in the way rooms get, when a thing that was one shape for a long time becomes a different shape, and everyone present is recalibrating. Hirsch looked at Lena. "Dr. Whitmore, I owe you an apology on behalf of this institution." "You weren't aware," she said. "That's not sufficient." He meant it, she thought. It wasn't adequate, but it was real. "What can Harbor Ridge do? What do you need from us?" She'd thought about this. She'd thought about it at 2 in the morning and on the drive here, and in the 30 seconds she'd spent in the elevator this morning. She knew what she was going to say. "I want to practice," she said. "Here, as a trauma physician." She looked at him steadily. "I've been doing the work for 3 years. I'd like the title to match." Voss was in his office when she knocked. She hadn't planned this part. She'd planned the IG meeting and the board administrator conversation and the meeting with Martinez this afternoon. She hadn't planned this. But she was here, and his door was open, and she knocked anyway. He looked up. He already knew. She could see it in his face that he knew. That the morning had not been private. That in a hospital of this size, a federal investigation meeting with the administrator got around in under an hour. "Whitmore," he said, then stopped. "Dr. Whitmore." She came in. Didn't sit. Stood in the middle of the room with her hands relaxed at her sides. "I'm not here to have a conversation about what happened," she said. "I think we both understand what happened." He was very still. "Yes. I'm here because you told me something last night. In the hallway. You said Calder framed the recommendations as a performance assessment, as legitimate clinical oversight." He met her eyes. "That's what I believed it was." "I know." She held his gaze. "That's why I'm here. Because I think there's a difference between someone who built a system to harm someone and someone who operated inside a system without fully understanding it." A pause. "You need a lawyer. A good one. You need to cooperate fully with the medical board when they contact you about the Seattle file." She paused again. "And you need to be a better physician than you've been here. Not for me. For the patients." He was quiet for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Not the fractional calculated expression she'd learned to read over 14 months, but something underneath those, something less managed. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you asked me what I was, before this." She looked at him directly. "I was a physician who took blame for something she didn't do because I thought it would protect people I cared about. It didn't. It just protected the people who needed protecting from." She let that sit for a second. "Don't make the same mistake." She walked out of his office. In the hallway, she stood for a moment. Her chest was doing the complicated thing again. She let it. Then she went to work. Donna found her at the nursing station at 11:45, 6 minutes before her shift started, and hugged her. Briefly, efficiently, without ceremony, Donna Marsh was not a ceremony person, and then stepped back and looked at her with the expression of someone who'd been holding something carefully for a long time and had just been told she could set it down. "Full privileges?" Donna asked. "Pending the formal credential review, which is a process, not an obstacle." Lena was logging into the charting system. "Probably 3 to 4 weeks. And until then?" "Until then, I'm still a nurse." She looked at Donna. "Which I'm fine with." Donna laughed, a short, genuine sound that Lena hadn't heard from her in months. "You're impossible." "I know." Priya appeared behind Donna with the expression of someone who'd heard a version of the news and needed to confirm it. Webb appeared behind Priya, and then Gloria from the ICU, who'd come down specifically, which meant the information had moved faster than Lena had assumed. She stood at the nursing station while people she'd worked alongside for 3 years looked at her with expressions that were complicated and human, and trying to figure out what to do with a recalibration this significant. Some of them looked ashamed, some of them looked relieved, most of them looked like both at once. "I have a shift," she said. "And so do most of you." They dispersed, but not all the way. The quality of the floor was different, the way a room changes temperature when a window opens, subtle but undeniable. She went to work. She met Danny Martinez at the Bayview Hotel at 4 p.m. Solis brought her, drove her, and then stayed in the lobby because he understood, without being told, that this particular meeting didn't need a witness. Martinez was in the hotel restaurant. He was 41, broad through the shoulders, with the specific permanent carriage of someone who'd been military for 20 years, and would be for the next 20, regardless of whether he was technically enlisted. He had a coffee in front of him, and he was looking at the door when she came in, and when he saw her, his face did something that she was going to carry with her for a long time. He stood up. She sat down across from him. "You look different," he said. "It's been 7 years." "Not different bad." He sat, wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I've been trying to tell them what happened since 2021. 2 years of IG meetings and deferred timelines and—" He stopped. His jaw was tight. "I'm sorry it took this long." "You kept going," she said. "That's what matters." "You carried me out," he said. "You carried me out of a sector that was still hot, with 2 other casualties, and then you took the blame for the decision that got us all out alive." He met her eyes. The specific directness of a man who'd been trying to get to this conversation for 2 years and was now here. "That's not something I was going to let stand on the record." She looked at him for a moment. She'd thought about this conversation, had been thinking about it since Solis texted her last night. She'd imagined it might feel like something resolving, a completion of an interrupted circuit. It did feel like that. It also felt like something heavier than she'd expected. Not bad heavy, but real heavy. The weight of a thing actually mattering rather than the weight of carrying it alone. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Not as a witness, generally." He looked slightly startled by the question. Then, "Good days and bad ones." He shrugged, the kind of shrug that contained more than it expressed. "I've got a kid now, 7 years old, drives me insane." He almost smiled. "Good insane." "That's good." "Yeah." He looked at her. "What about you? What happens now?" She thought about Farrell's rhythm on the monitor, restored and holding, about Webb's hands steadying once she gave him the direction, about 3 Marines alive in an ICU in Clearwater Bay, about a corrected record and a credential review in 3 to 4 weeks, and Donna's brief, fierce hug, and the particular altered quality of a hospital floor when people understand they've been wrong. "I practice medicine," she said. "Here, probably. For a while." "Here?" "I built something here, even if it wasn't exactly what I intended." She looked at her coffee. "I'm done dismantling things I built and starting over." He nodded slowly. "Good." They sat for another 40 minutes. They talked about Coast, not the investigation version, but the real version, the version that was 2 people in a restaurant in Clearwater Bay reconstructing a night that had mattered enormously and had been officially misdescribed for 3 years. It wasn't cathartic, exactly. It was more like taking something out and looking at it in decent light for the first time, and finding that it was what it was, hard and consequential and real, and that the looking didn't make it worse. When she left, Martinez stood again. He held out his hand. She shook it. "For the record," he said, "since we're fixing the record." His grip was firm, and he held it for a moment. "Raven, best combat medic I ever saw, and I've seen a few." She looked at him. The hotel lobby was bright and ordinary behind the glass of the restaurant door. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. She walked out. The board voted that evening. She wasn't there. She had no standing to be present at a closed board session. But Donna texted her at 8:22 p.m. with a sequence of facts delivered in Donna's characteristically flat, information-forward style. Calder resigned from the board. Effective immediately. His statement cites personal reasons. The restructuring proposal has been officially withdrawn from the agenda. Hearst is recommending a formal clinical staffing review beginning next month. She was in her car in the parking garage when she read this. The garage was quiet, just the hum of the ventilation system and the distant ambient noise of the bay somewhere beyond the concrete. She sat with it for a minute, let herself feel the full weight of it, not triumph, because she'd learned a long time ago that what she wanted from justice was not triumph, but accuracy. The record says what happened. The record is correct. The people who made it incorrect are answering for that. Accuracy. That was what she'd wanted. She was about to start her car when her phone rang. Unknown number, Fort Belmont area code. She answered. Dr. Whitmore. A voice she didn't recognize. Male, clipped, the precise diction of someone accustomed to being listened to. My name is Brigadier General Thomas Harwick, Inspector General's office. I apologize for the hour. General Harwick, she said, I wanted to speak with you directly about the formal record correction. A pause. The charges against Colonel Dix were filed this afternoon, as you may be aware. What you may not be aware of is that in the course of our examination of his files, we found something additional. She was still. The Coast Mission, Harwick said carefully. There was a second operation, 6 months prior, in which a similar authorization pattern occurred, a similar decision made, attributed to a junior officer, with the originating authorization removed from the record. He paused. The junior officer in that case did not survive to give testimony. The parking garage. The ventilation hum. What are you telling me? She asked. I'm telling you that Dix has done this before, and that the individual whose record we're reviewing for that prior incident, their family has been notified and has requested an advocate. Harwick's voice was careful, precise, weighing each word. They've specifically requested you, Dr. Whitmore, by name. She stared at the concrete wall in front of her. They know my name, she said. The soldier in question was a medic, Harwick said. Her call sign was Sparrow. She spoke about you. According to her family, she spoke about you often. A pause that had mass in it. She said you were the best combat physician she'd ever trained under. She said if anything ever happened to her, she wanted someone like you in her corner. The car was very quiet. What's her name? Lena asked. Her name was First Lieutenant Cora Bates, Harwick said. She died in an incident that was classified as an equipment malfunction. We have reason to believe the classification was deliberate. Lena's hand was tight on the phone. Her chest had gone somewhere past complicated into something she couldn't name at all. I'll do it, she said. Dr. Whitmore, I want to make sure you understand what this may involve. If there are additional charges against Dix, additional witnesses, a wider scope of investigation, General Harwick, she said it quietly, with the same weight she'd once given orders in active sectors at night. I said I'll do it. A pause. Then, thank you, Doctor. She ended the call. Sat in the parking garage for a long time. The ventilation hummed. The bay was out there somewhere, dark and continuous and indifferent to all of it. First Lieutenant Cora Bates. Call sign Sparrow. Dead in a classified incident, her record carrying the wrong shape, her family asking for someone to stand in her corner. Lena looked at the steering wheel. She was tired in every direction. She was also, underneath the tired, something else. Something that had been dormant for 3 years and was now awake, and recognizing itself and not at all interested in going back to sleep. She started the car. She had work to do. The drive home took 14 minutes. She spent 11 of them not thinking about Cora Bates, which was its own kind of thinking about Cora Bates. The deliberate negative space of a name she hadn't known 2 hours ago and was now carrying the full weight of. First Lieutenant, medic, call sign Sparrow, died in something classified as equipment malfunction, family asking for an advocate by name. By the time she parked, she had stopped trying not to think about it and just let it be there, alongside everything else that was there. Martinez's handshake, Farrell's rhythm on the monitor, the corrected record, Donna's hug, Voss's face when she'd told him not to make the same mistake she had. She sat in her car outside her apartment building for 3 minutes. The bay was audible from here if she left the windows down. A low, continuous sound, not quite waves, just presence. She left the windows down. She thought about what it meant that a young medic had died with her name in her mouth. Not as a comfort, as a standard. Raven is who you want in your corner. Raven is what good looks like. She thought about carrying that for an unknown amount of time into an investigation that was going to be harder than this one, because this one had ended with Lena alive and cleared and the record corrected, and Cora Bates's investigation was going to end with a family who got answers but didn't get their daughter back. She thought about whether she was the right person for it, concluded that the question was irrelevant. She was the person being asked, and she'd already said yes, and the yes had come from somewhere deep and immediate that didn't require deliberation. She went inside. She made tea. She didn't drink. She slept better than she had in 4 days, which wasn't saying much, but it was something. The credential review took 3 weeks and 2 days. She knew it would take time. She'd managed that expectation carefully, kept her head down, kept her hands in the work. She did her shifts. She checked on Farrell, who graduated from the ICU to a step-down room to a discharge plan over the span of 12 days, and who, on his last morning in the building, shook her hand with the grip of a man who understood that the word thanks was not going to cover what he meant, but was going to have to. She checked on Tate, who was transferred to a rehabilitation facility at Fort Belmont after 10 days, and who texted her from the transport van a single line, "Don't disappear again." She checked on Okafor, who was the last of the 3 to leave, who asked her on his final day whether she was going to be okay, and who laughed when she said, "I'm getting there," a genuine laugh, the kind that said he recognized the answer for what it was and respected it. She trained Webb on 3 additional procedures during those 3 weeks. Not formally. There was no formal framework for it yet. Just alongside, the way she'd learned half of what she knew, in the moment of the work, someone slightly ahead showing someone slightly behind where to put their hands. Webb was a fast learner, which she'd known, and he was getting better at trusting the fast learning, which was the thing he'd needed. Priya she sat with twice in the break room, in the in-between time that a hospital always had somewhere, and they talked about things that were not medicine, about Priya's sister who was finishing law school, about Clearwater Bay in winter, about what Priya wanted her career to look like in 10 years. Small things. But Priya had flinched the day Voss had dismissed Lena in front of the whole bay, and she'd been flinching quietly ever since, and Lena understood that sometimes the most useful thing you could do for someone was demonstrate, consistently and without announcement, that they were allowed to take up space. Donna she saw every day. They didn't talk about the investigation constantly. They talked about it when it needed discussing, and otherwise they did their jobs, which was the appropriate proportion. Voss had gone on administrative leave pending the medical board's review. The leave was voluntary, technically. She heard through Donna that he'd cooperated with the board's investigators, had provided full disclosure of the Calder briefing and his own prior disciplinary history, had not attempted to minimize either. She didn't know what his outcome would be. She'd meant what she'd said in his office. The distinction between someone who builds a system of harm and someone who operates inside one needed to be made. Not for him, but for accuracy, because accuracy was the thing she'd been fighting for. She wasn't responsible for his outcome. She'd told him what he needed to know. That was the extent of her obligation. She heard through Solis that Warren Dix had been formally charged. Falsification of military records, conduct unbecoming, and 2 additional charges related to the Bates investigation that she wasn't yet at liberty to discuss publicly. She heard that Richard Calder had been referred to the DOJ, and that his legal team was cooperating aggressively with prosecutors, which usually meant a man trying to minimize what was coming rather than fight it. She heard these things and noted them and put them in the appropriate internal drawer, which was the drawer labeled, "Not your work to do. The system is doing it." She was not naive enough to believe the system always did its work, but she was pragmatic enough to know that her part was done, that she had given the accurate account, that the evidence had done what evidence did when it was real and complete, and that the rest was the machinery of institutions grinding forward in the direction of something that was not justice exactly. Justice was a word that implied clean resolution, and nothing about this was clean, but was at least correction. The record corrected, the wrong acknowledged, the people responsible answering. It wasn't everything. It was not nothing. So, the day her credentials were formally reinstated, she found out by email at 7:43 in the morning. 1 paragraph. Official letterhead. Your clinical privileges at Harbor Ridge Military Medical Center have been updated to reflect your current credentials. She read it twice, forwarded it to Solis with no comment, put her phone in her pocket and went to work. At 10 a.m., Hurst called her into his office and officially offered her the position of trauma medicine attending, with a faculty appointment that would allow her to train residents. She accepted. They shook hands across his desk. It was not a dramatic moment. It was an administrative one, which was exactly what it needed to be. She was in the hallway outside Hurst's office, heading back to the floor, when she ran into Webb. He looked at her, at the set of her face, which was apparently communicating something, because he stopped. Is it official? As of this morning. He stood there for a second. Then he stuck out his hand, which was such a genuinely earnest gesture, so unperformed that she almost smiled. She shook it. Dr. Whitmore, he said. Dr. Webb, she said back. You have a patient in Bay 2. He went. She followed. 3 weeks after her credentials were restored, Tate, Farrell, and Okafor arrived at Harbor Ridge together. She knew they were coming. Tate had texted the day before, characteristically terse. Tomorrow. All 3 of us. Morning. She'd texted back. I have rounds at 9. He'd texted, we'll wait. They arrived at 10:15. They were in civilian clothes, which somehow made them look simultaneously less and more military. Without the uniform, there was nothing to hide behind. Just 3 men in their 30s who moved with the specific posture of people who'd spent their professional lives in situations where how you held your body communicated readiness or its absence. Farrell was moving carefully. The ribs were still tender. She could see it in the way he favored his left side. But he was upright and present, and had the color of a man whose body had decided definitively to continue existing. Tate walked with a slight favoring of his right leg that would likely be there for months, but was improving. Okafor looked, honestly, like he'd had a better recovery than anyone had projected, which Lena attributed to the fact that he had refused, on several documented occasions, to behave like a man who was supposed to be recovering. She met them in the hospital lobby. It was a busy time of morning, people moving through, the ambient noise of a functioning medical facility, nobody paying particular attention to 3 Marines and a doctor in the middle of the atrium. Farrell spoke first. We wanted to do this in person. You didn't have to. We know we didn't have to. Okafor's voice was even, patient, the voice of a man who'd decided how this was going to go and was not interested in having it derailed by her deflection. We wanted to. Tate looked at her with the specific directness she'd come to associate with him, the look of someone who said what he meant without auditing it first. You saved all 3 of us, twice, in Farrell's case, and while you were doing that, you were also fighting a different battle that you shouldn't have had to fight at all. I had help, she said. You had help, he agreed, but you were the one who showed up. Every day, in a building full of people who were treating you like you were less than you were, and you showed up and did the work anyway. He paused. That took something. I want to name it. She looked at the 3 of them. The lobby moved around them. Civilians, staff, the ordinary busy traffic of a place where people came in broken and left less broken. The work she'd been doing for 3 years without the title and was now doing with it. The work that had always been the same work regardless of what the badge said. Tate, she said, you're the one who didn't let it stand. You made the call. You saved my life first. That's my job. It's more than your job and you know it. He said it without drama, just truth. It's who you are. She looked at them for a moment. These 3 men she'd met in a trauma bay at 5 in the afternoon 4 weeks ago, when everything was blood and alarms and the specific controlled panic of a hospital falling into crisis. She'd kept her hands moving and her voice steady and her attention on the next necessary thing, and they had lived, and the living had unraveled something she'd wrapped herself in for 3 years. Thank you for coming back, she said. She meant it in more than one direction. Farrell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out. She took it, unfolded it. It was a photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly pixelated, the way photos looked when they'd been sent digitally and printed on whatever was available. It showed a woman in combat gear, in a posture she recognized as her own, in a place she recognized as approximately where she'd been on the worst and most consequential night of her career. The photo was dark, taken from a distance, not posed. She was carrying something, someone, and her face, in the poor quality image, was angled down toward the weight she was moving. She didn't know who had taken it. She'd never seen it. Martinez had it, Farrell said quietly. He's had it for 7 years. He wanted you to have it. She looked at the photograph for a long time. The woman in it was doing exactly what needed to be done, and looked exactly the way she'd felt that night. Not certain, not heroic, not composed, just committed, just moving, just refusing to stop. She folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket. "Tell him thank you," she said. Donna found her after they left, because Donna always found her when it mattered. She was at the nursing station. Her nursing station still, even now, because the nursing station was where the information lived. And she was never going to be the kind of physician who considered herself too senior for the floor, reviewing a chart, and Donna leaned on the counter beside her with the particular sideways posture of a woman who'd been standing on hospital floors for 28 years and had strong opinions about the ergonomics. "How are you?" Donna asked. "Getting there," she said, which she'd said to Okafor, and which was still true, and which she was beginning to understand was not a temporary state on the way to somewhere else, but an accurate description of what being a functional human being actually felt like. You were always getting there. You were never fully arrived. That was not a failure. That was just what it was. "I wanted to ask you something," Donna said. "Ask." "The training program Hurst mentioned, for the residents and nursing staff, advanced trauma protocols, combat medicine application in civilian settings." She paused. "Are you running it?" "That's the plan." "I want to be involved." Donna's voice was direct. "Not as a student, as a co-developer. I know this floor. I know what the nursing staff needs and what they're not getting. I want to build something that actually works for the people on the ground, not just for the credentialing paperwork." Lena looked at her. Donna had 28 years of knowing what worked and what didn't. 28 years of watching programs get implemented from the top and fail at the floor. 28 years of doing the real work of keeping people alive through the gaps in every system that was supposed to be doing it for her. "Yes," Lena said. Donna nodded, pushed off the counter. "Good. I'll set up the first planning meeting." She walked away. Lena watched her go, the particular purposeful walk of a woman who'd just added something to her list and was already thinking about how to execute it. She turned back to the chart, finished her notes, moved on to the next patient. The Bates investigation took 4 months. She won't tell you it was easy, because it wasn't. It was harder than her own case in every way, because Cora Bates couldn't speak for herself, and the family's grief was a presence in every meeting, real and heavy and deserving of something more than paperwork. She worked with Vane's office and with a military attorney named Ruiz, who was exhaustingly methodical and exactly what the case required. She gave a testimony twice. She reviewed documents on evenings after long shifts and on weekends when she should have been doing something else, sitting at her kitchen table with the bay audible through the open window. Warren Dix was convicted on 6 counts. The sentencing happened on a Thursday. She was in the hospital when Solis texted her the result. She was between patients, standing in the hallway with her phone in her hand, and she read it and stood with it for a moment and then put her phone in her pocket and went to see her next patient. She didn't celebrate. She wasn't sure celebration was the right response to something that had cost this much and taken this long and left a family permanently without someone they loved. What she felt was closer to the stillness of a long task completed. Not relief exactly, but the specific settling of a weight that has been set down correctly, in the right place. Finally, Richard Calder pled guilty to federal obstruction charges and was sentenced to 30 months. The board at Harbor Ridge had already moved on. New member, different name, different history. The institution continued. Institutions did. Cora Bates's military record was corrected 6 months after the investigation concluded. Her family got a letter and a ceremony and a corrected account of what had actually happened to their daughter and why. Lena attended the ceremony. She stood in the back in civilian clothes because she was not the point of the ceremony, and she knew it. The family gave their remarks. She listened. After the mother, a small, fierce woman named Dorothy Bates, who had the look of someone who'd been fighting for so long that fighting had become structural, found Lena in the reception room. "You're Whitmore," Dorothy said. Not a question. "Yes. Cora talked about you." Dorothy looked at her steadily. Her eyes were tired in the deep way, the kind of tired that goes past any particular night. "She said you were the kind of doctor who remembered that patients were people." She said that sounds obvious, but it's not. Lena thought about that for a moment. She was right. She wanted to be like you. Dorothy's voice was level. She was not going to cry here, or if she was going to do it later, in private, which was a decision Lena recognized and respected. I wanted you to know that." "I'm honored," Lena said. And then, because honesty was the thing she was committed to now, in all directions, she did better than me. She kept fighting, and she hadn't even been given the chance yet. That takes a different kind of courage than what I had. Dorothy looked at her for a long moment. Then she put her hand briefly on Lena's arm, 1 second, no more, and walked back to her family. In November, she stood in front of 14 residents and 8 nurses in Harbor Ridge's largest conference room and gave the first session of the Advanced Trauma Training Program. She'd spent 3 weeks building the curriculum with Donna, who had opinions about everything and was correct about most of it. The program was not theoretical. It was procedural, grounded, built from the real mechanics of what happened when a body was in crisis and a human being had to decide, in real time, what the next necessary thing was. She started the first session the way she'd decided to start it, which was not with protocol or credential or an account of her own history. She started it with a question. "What do you think the most important thing in this room is?" she asked. 14 residents and 8 nurses looked at her, and several of them glanced around, at the equipment, at the materials, at the projected protocol guides on the screen behind her. Webb, in the second row, didn't glance around. He looked at her. "The people," he said. "The people," she agreed. "The patients first. And also you. What you know, what you're willing to learn, what you do when the right call is unclear and the clock is moving." She looked at the room. "This program is not going to teach you to be perfect. You won't be. I'm not. Nobody in this building is, and the ones who think they are the most dangerous people you'll work with." She let that sit for a moment. "What we're going to do is make you honest about what you know and what you don't, about when to act and when to ask, about the difference between hesitation that kills and hesitation that saves." She paused. "Those are real distinctions. We're going to learn them." The room was quiet in the way rooms get, when people understand that something is being offered to them that is actually useful. She began. She still drove past the bay on the way home most nights. The water was the same water it had always been, indifferent, continuous, doing what water does regardless of everything happening on the land beside it. She found that continuity useful now, something that was there before her and would be there after, unremarkable and reliable. She kept the photograph Martinez had sent. It was on her desk at home, not framed, just there, folded and unfolded enough times that the creases had softened. The woman in it was doing exactly what needed doing with no audience and no acknowledgement and no guarantee that it would matter. That was the thing about the photo that she kept returning to. The certainty that she hadn't known, in that moment, that it would turn out the way it did. She'd moved because moving was the only available option, because there were people who would die if she didn't, because the knowledge of what to do was in her hands, and her hands were there, and the choice was as simple and as heavy as that. She'd spent 3 years believing that the silence was the price of survival. She'd been wrong about that. The silence was a cost, and costs compound, and eventually they come due in ways you haven't prepared for. In a call sign said out loud in a trauma bay, in a man carrying a photograph for 7 years, and a young medic who died with a name in her mouth. What she understood now that she hadn't 3 years ago was that the silence had not kept her safe. It had kept her small. And there was a difference, a significant, fundamental difference, between surviving and being present, between existing carefully and living with your full weight in the world. She was done being careful with herself. She had work to do. On a Tuesday morning in December, she walked into Harbor Ridge Military Medical Center through the main entrance, her badge clipped to her coat, her name on the badge reading what it had always been and what it finally said correctly. Dr. Lena Whitmore, Trauma Medicine. She nodded to the security guard at the desk. She took the stairs instead of the elevator. She went to her patients. The woman they had dismissed, diminished, quietly attempted to erase, she was the one who stayed, who kept her hands in the work when the work was thankless, who told the truth when the truth was costly, who stood in corner after corner for people who needed someone in theirs. She had not survived because she was untouchable. She had survived because she refused, at every pressure point, to become less than what she knew herself to be. That was the thing that couldn't be falsified, reassigned, or sealed in a file somewhere. That was the thing that remained. She went to work.